Welcome to Sacred Realms. It's a great day in Hyrule, y'all. Welcome to Sacred Realms, a Zelda Retrospective Podcast. I'm your host, Lyndon Willoughby, joined as always by my co-host, Matt Willoughby. Back in the garage tonight. In classic Texas fashion, Matt, we skipped fall and proceeded straight to winter.
Well, that's all you can expect during these Texas seasons on top of climate change and everything else. So,
Yeah.
you know, what else could you expect?
I also think that's a Monty Python thing, right? Isn't that there's a joke in the Holy Grail about that? There is,
and we skipped spring and went straight to,
summer, fall or something.
Yeah,
And
it definitely happened.
so this is my admission that I haven't seen that movie in far too long, and I should remedy that at some future point.
It has been
'cause
quite a long time.
It's a hysterical movie. It's very funny.
It's a really great movie, for sure.
Yeah.
It's a classic.
How you doing tonight, Matt?
You know, I'm good, man. I was actually going to ask you that. I know it's been kind of a rough week around the industry, and Bungie specifically. I know everyone has. It's no news that some stuff has happened. Just checking in on you and making sure you're all right.
It's interesting how the streams of my 9-to-5 job and the scheduling of this podcast can sometimes cross, because we were supposed to record this episode on Monday night, and our guest of the evening and I had a quick discussion in which we decided that the mood was just really not there. For sure. For that, it was a very bad day. Monday was a bad day. And so that's why we're putting this one out just a little late. To answer your question, Matt, it has been a tough week. I obviously don't want to get too specific about anything. The kind of unwise thing to do, but
For sure. No specifics, just a temperature check.
it's been better. To be
on the
honest.
scale of the doctor's office angry face to doctor's office happy face, are we in the semi-sad face?
The current state of the video game industry doesn't have a face on that board that would accurately communicate how I feel about it. So
fair enough.
But it was a good analogy nonetheless, Matt.
Okay, fair enough.
I'm doing okay with it. You know, I'm happy to be doing this. This promises to be a pick me up, which is exactly what I needed, and so I'm very grateful for it for that reason. Our guest of the evening, Max Nichols. How are you doing, buddy?
I'm doing okay, all things considered. I'm excited to be here.
Yes.
Yeah. Hey everyone, Max is back. Yay! Max Nichols episode.
Yeah, it's me. It's me.
Yeah. But anyway, the last thing that I'll really say about any of this is that obviously there's a lot of discourse out on socials and things right now. And that's all out there for you to search if you have the mood to do so. The thing that I would just say is that there's a lot of really talented people in the video game industry, and it's disheartening to see the way that things turn out for them sometimes. And I think that's about as specific as I want to get with that.
Cool. Well, not being employed by Bungie and not being in the video game industry, I will just say that it is really sad to see the state of how many mass layoffs there have been this year, both at companies who I know well, like Bungie, and companies who I don't know super well. There have been it's been a year of crazy amount of layoffs, and it's really sad to see the people who make these wonderful games be the ones to bear the brunt of the punishment on things like financial underperformance or anything like that. So I appreciate what everyone in the game industry does. You and Max both working in that and putting out really great product, and I appreciate you both and all the people you work with, and wishing everyone who is still at Bungie the best, and everyone who got laid off, wishing them the best as well. Having been the recipient of a layoff myself, I know how really horrible that is and how much that sucks. So my best wishes with them.
Your takeaway from that, Max, is that Matt wishes us the best.
Specifically you two, yes, I do. I mean, generally speaking, but specifically this week, more so than normal.
Yeah, if you were ever unclear about the extent to which Matt wishes you the best in your life just generally, now you know. There's no more uncertainty. Oh, man. Okay, well, moving on from somber topics, we have some Zelda to talk about. This is going to be a really fun episode. It's going to be, in a lot of ways, a follow-up to last week's episode. Very different experiences, but the conversation, I think, is going to continue sort of naturally from where we left things off. Just out of curiosity, Max, have you had a chance to listen to our conversation with Sam about Arbiter's Grounds?
I have. I was about halfway through it on Monday, and I was like, shucks, I'm not going to know their final thoughts. And now I have listened to all of it.
Wonderful. So, yeah, I really think that today's chunk of Twilight Princess is going to be, for similar reasons, and also for some different reasons, a real joy to talk about. So, going to be a really great time. Matt, I mean, you good over there?
Yeah, no, sorry. It's just had a tickle in my throat. We're all good.
Yeah, cool. Matt, you know what? How are things going with you, real quick, before we move on? Like, obviously, our news is kind of big right now, but you are a person with a lot of life things going on too at the moment. So,
well, you're not wrong. I mean, I have a wedding we're planning, and started a new job a couple months ago. Things are going fairly well. Unfortunately, last night, which was Halloween, my fiance was in a car accident. Someone ran a red light and caused a car accident that she was involved in. She is very fortunately and thankfully unhurt. The car is probably going to be fine. It wasn't serious at all. So, life has been kind of up and down, and it's been a sea, an uneven sea in which I would like to sing a pirate shanty upon. But,
we continue sailing the turbulent waters of life.
Indeed we do. And, Lyndon, this podcast is one of the lighthouses that always guides me back to a place of happiness and emotional and mental stability.
Matt, that analogy made me feel warm and fuzzy inside, and I thank you for that.
You're welcome. It's this is a happy place for me, and it always lifts my spirits when we get to sit, whether it's just you and me or with a good guest, and we get to sit and talk about Zelda and, have a cigar and some whiskey. Like it's always a good time.
It's going to be a lot of fun because so obviously we're recording this episode this week, but the time has come around in our schedule to record another bonus episode as well. I think the current plan is that this weekend you and I are going to delve into what is possibly the goofiest possible version of Zelda that anybody could consume, which is the next stretch of our excursion into the Legend of Zelda animated series.
Yeah, I think you and I have some strong feelings that are going to come out in that episode. So looking forward to it. We're gonna get together and watch some Zelda together. Maybe with your kiddo, if chance happens to be smiling on his good mood.
I do wonder, like, as an adult watching cartoons from that era now, I don't think I realized how creepy that they were in some ways when I was a kid. And I'm wondering if my son, who as a 2-year-old is watching a lot of, let's just say like, I was going to say more highly polished cartoon content, but that's maybe not the best way to put it. It's just a different medium. Everything's kind of CG-ified these days.
Well, he's also been watching Fireman Sam, which is horrible.
Well, yeah, but he doesn't. But that's my point. Like, he doesn't know. So I'm curious to see if the Legend of Zelda animated series is just too different from the stuff that he's consuming as children's programming now, and whether he'll have any interest for it at all. It's going to be an interesting experiment.
Yes, I'm excited to delve into it. It's going to be fun.
Max, I don't think we've ever talked to you about the Zelda animated series before. Have you ever dipped your toe into those waters?
Yeah, I've watched most of it. I don't think I watched the last few episodes. And it's sure something.
That is accurate. That is an accurate summation.
One of the shows of all time.
I've processed some interviews about it for my website, which is kind of fun sometimes because it's just a very weird look into like, 80s Nintendo, where Nintendo of America operated as a totally separate entity, basically, and did its own stuff all the time and made deals and gave people permission to do stuff.
Outsourced its main IP.
Today would never let them do. Yeah.
Yeah. Definitely very interesting. I will say that I'm very glad, Matt, that we did not get the urge to dive into that subject matter before playing Zelda 1 and Zelda 2.
Dude, it would have been completely incomprehensible. Like, it would have been bad. So yeah, very glad we played Zelda 1 and 2 before watching that show.
So yeah, this weekend
Okay.
Oh, good.
I have a quote to read to you.
Yay!
So this is from the director of the Zelda cartoon, John Grusdy. And he says, I'll paraphrase a little bit. He basically says that Nintendo gave him a advanced copy of Adventure of Link in Japanese because it wasn't out yet. And he says, I didn't know anything about the game when I started. I'd never played them. I wasn't a gamer or anything. That's how I learned how the characters move, the sound effects, the music. I got to be able to do the games all the way through pretty quickly, as a matter of fact, because I knew all the shortcuts. I could get through both of them in less than 2 minutes, probably. It's pretty fast.
What?
I feel like there's...
So make of that what you will.
Okay, all right.
I feel like that isn't possible.
You say that,
not
but
possible.
like, yeah. At 2 minutes, I'm sure is a hyper exaggeration, but like, I don't know. There are people, some of whom we've talked to on the show before, who are just like really adept at just burning through those games in record time, and that's without glitches or anything. So, okay, big claim from the guy, but good to know. What I have to say about that. Not the quote specifically, but about the fact that you had a quote, is that I really need to come up with a quote audio drop for this show, Matt. Like, anytime Max drops a quote, I need a drop for that.
I would say do the hey listen, but we do that for when we have to intercut something.
No, I can't. Then that's lazy.
Do the tattle. Ding.
I'll think about it. I'll think about it.
Maybe the Book of Mudora sound, the jingle from Link to the Past.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
That's a good one.
Okay. All right. Yeah. These are all good options. I'll have a think on it. I'll let you guys know what I come up with. Anyway, going to be a super fun episode, and can't wait to record that later on this week. I think that's kind of a catch up on where we're at with the upcoming pod. Of course, in the next few weeks, we're going to be having to drop a poll again.
We are. Actually, we should probably do that next week.
This is episode 7 of 12, so
probably
2 weeks from now, I think we're going to put up a poll.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah, and then we'll need to actually come up with a final answer to top down or Zelda like, and just see where we land with that.
Yeah,
I don't know. We'll figure it out.
We'll see.
It's fine. All right. Before we jump into housekeeping and talk about what we played this week, real quick, very abbreviated whiskey bit. We're back to the Wild Turkey Rare Breed Rye this week because it's cold outside. And it's a spicy rye, and it feels good. It warms the belly. So
it does. It warms the bones.
Here's to the fall weather we've been waiting for, Matt.
Fall weather. Cheers.
Chink.
Boom. Very good. And Max, are you drinking a summer shandy this week, or just something a little more fall appropriate?
I have a cider from Two Towns Cider House. The flavor is Raspberry Cosmic Crisp.
Ooh, okay.
It's pretty good.
Yeah, sounds great.
I guess Cosmic Crisp is a apple variety.
Hey, ciders are decidedly fall appropriate.
Yep.
There you go.
100%. Yeah. And I've been led to believe by various coworkers that it's actually the weather is fairly similar up there to what we're having here right now. It's pretty cold there as well, right, Max?
Yeah, it's been trending a little cooler.
I mean, their definition of cold and our definition of cold is
50s.
probably different.
That's fair. Yeah. Okay. Well, anyway, it's a fun time of the year. All right, let's get into some housekeeping and then dive into what is undeniably a cold section of this game. Hey. How about that? All right.
That was bad.
It was terrible. But like, the art of the terrible segue.
That's what makes it good.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's like it's an art form in and of itself. One which I'm always practicing. The housekeeping is not much of an art form, but has to be done regardless. So here it goes.
Go for it.
If you didn't know, Sacred Realms is a weekly re-examination of The Legend of Zelda, one little slice at a time. Sacred Realms drops every Wednesday and is available on all major podcast networks. Every week we play a new section of a Zelda game. Then we sit down here to talk and to drop our hot takes. If that sounds fun to you, please head over to Apple Podcasts, hit that subscribe button, and be sure to leave us a review. 5-star reviews are greatly appreciated, and they have a chance to get a shout out here on the show. If you want more Sacred Realms in your life, you can head over to patreon.com/sacredrealmspod to get access to our Discord channel, listener mail, vote on what game we play next. Again, going to be doing that real soon, and much more. Additionally, one of the benefits that Master Sword, patrons, and above get is that we read their names every week here on the show. Those legendary individuals are Nintendo, Adam, Sakura Sky, Art, Jeremy, Derek, Cosmic Link, Dante 2, Tom, Andy, Stephanie, Billy, Connor, Rachel, Shepherd Street, Matthew, Chris, Daniel, Fallout 907, Kelso, Chris, Tiffany the Star, Patrice, Stephanie, Darknuck, Il Maestro himself, the sender of wedding cake toppers, George, Mike, Dylan, Lennon, Melanie, Kolku, Aiden, Rowan, Josh, Nick, Gep, Brittany, Davey, Haru the Mighty, Albert, Mark, Andy, Cameron, Daniel, Nick D_TV, Travis, Hyrule Interviews, aka your guest of the evening, Garrett, and Drew. These are the most legendary of individuals, and I would go sledding down a mountainside on an icicle with any of them any day of the week. But without further ado, let's talk about what we played this week. We do that every week in the Sacred Realms Rundown, which is a 6-part analysis of what we played this week and the feelings that it made us feel. Today, we are covering Twilight Princess, Chapter 7. Part 1 of the Sacred Realms Rundown is, as always, the plot recap, this week read by Matt. Take it away, Matt.
Hey, listen!
And psych, sorry about this, y'all. Matt and I had to switch places last minute, so you're stuck with my dulcet tones. Without further ado, this is the plot recap, as read by moi. As we exit the lair of the felled dragon into the dry desert air, the top of the prison is above us, and as we climb the stairs toward the roof, we can almost feel the presence of the cursed mirror weighing down on us. As soon as we set foot onto the roof, a trio of shadow beasts drop from a portal above, but the power of the Master Sword makes short work of these dark minions. We use the spinner to climb the tall statue in the center of the roof and stand here overlooking the prison and the desert below. The roof of the prison is circular with 6 large pillars reaching into the sky. Each pillar is topped with a circular stone medallion, each bearing a different symbol that calls back through the ages to the story of the hero of time. We use the spinner on a gear at the top of the statue, and the enormous chains attached to the pillars rise up a massive metal mirror frame and a large obsidian stone from under a century's worth of sand. We go to stand in front of the mirror with Midna, only to see her horror-struck expression as she looks upon a shattered pane of glass. Only a quarter of the mirror remains intact within its frame. 3 large chunks of the magical glass are missing, and it seems that our hopes to confront Zant in the Twilight Realm are dashed once and for all. As we comfort a distraught Midna and ponder the shattered mirror before us, we become aware of a pale light emanating from all around us. At the tops of most of the stone pillars stands a glowing spectral figure bathed in white light. A dark entity lurks in the twilight. It houses an evil power. You who are guided by fate, who possess the crest of the goddesses, hear us. At the command of the goddesses, we sages have guarded the mirror of twilight since ancient times. You seek it, but it has been shattered by mighty magic. That magic is a dark power only he possesses. His name is Ganondorf. The sages go on to tell us about Ganondorf, the leader of a band of thieves who invaded Hyrule in ancient times in the hopes of establishing control over the sacred realm. He was known throughout the land for his cruelty, ruthlessness, and control over evil magics. But in all of his rage and might, he was blinded with ambition. In time, he was exposed and brought low. He was sentenced to death here at the Arbiter's grounds, a sentence to be carried out by the sages using their magical blade. But by some divine prank, as the sages call it, Ganondorf was also blessed with the chosen power of the gods. The sword that impaled him could not kill him, and he broke free of his bondage, using his dark powers to slay one of the sages. In a desperate act, the remaining 5 sages activated the Mirror of Twilight and banished Ganondorf to the Twilight Realm, where they hoped he would be sealed forever. It appears that while in the Twilight Realm, Ganondorf has conscripted Zant and empowered him with the powerful magic that allowed him to overthrow the Twilight Realm and our own world in shadow. Midna laments that this revelation is coming far too late to be of any use, but is reassured when the sages inform her that the mirror is not fully broken. They say that only the true leader of the Twilight can destroy the mirror, so Zant was only able to break it, meaning it can be fixed as long as we can find the other 3 pieces. The pieces are hidden across Hyrule, one in a snowy mountain, one in an ancient grove, and the last up in the heavens. The sages charge us with finding these 3 pieces and fixing the mirror so that we may enter the Twilight Realm and confront Zant. Midna is on board with the plan, and we warp back towards Castletown to start our search for the fragments of the mirror. Since Telma's bar was a great place to start last time, we make our way straight there. Telma tells us that Ashe has gone north, following some mutterings about strange happenings in the snowy mountains north of Zora's domain. We warp back to Zora's domain and follow the mountain path at the bottom of the Great Waterfall, after receiving a cryptic warning from the Zora on guard duty about a beast man that has been coming down from the mountain to pillage the village's fish supply. We head up the path and into the cold embrace of the mountain that lies at Hyrule's northern border. We see a figure standing on a ledge overlooking a frozen lake, but it barely looks human, with a disconcerting furry hood that covers its head and shoulders. The figure turns and removes the hood to reveal Ashe, the very person that we came to see. She greets us in her terse manner and tells us that the mountain has been very strange since Zora's domain was frozen over. Aside from the much colder weather, the beast that lives in the mountains has been seen more frequently, and Ashe has come here to confirm this for herself. She passes us a crude drawing of a large furry beast, roughly the shape of a giant bear with a beaver-like tail holding a red fish. As much as she would like to investigate further, the raging blizzard prevents even a seasoned mountaineer like herself from going any further up the path. She encourages us to ask around the village about the mountain monster and see what we can learn before she packs up and heads back to Telma's bar. We ask that the Zora guard posted at the path's entrance about the sketch, and he reveals that the red fish is called a reek fish, and as far as he knows, only Prince Rallis has ever been successful in catching the elusive creature. Since this is our only lead, we warp back to Kakariko Village to talk to the prince and find out his secret. We find him in the Zora Spring behind the Kakariko graveyard, where apparently he's been spending almost every waking hour since recovering from his injuries. We talk to him briefly, and he confides in us that he is overcome with self-doubt and feelings of inadequacy about his new position as ruler of the Zora people. We don't have much to offer about ruling a people, so instead we just ask about the mountain beast. Rallis reveals his secret for catching the reekfish, his ornamental earring which is made of a special coral that the reekfish eat. He gives us the earring and resolves to go back to Zora's domain and take up his place on his mother's throne. We also head back to Zora's domain and use the earring combined with the fishing rod Colin gave us so long ago to catch ourselves a reekfish. True to its name, once out of the water the fish stinks to high heaven, but that should give us an easy scent to follow. We transform into our wolf shape and give the repulsive fish a good long sniff. Since we're heading up into the strong blizzard, we stay in our nice cozy wolf form and head back up the mountain path once more. The scent of the reekfish is so strong that it lingers even in the midst of the blizzard. Our thick fur coat keeps us well insulated against the cold, so we set off to follow the trail of stink up the mountain. Along the way, we are accosted by some ghostly ice wolves, icy geese, and even a couple of poes, but none of these pose much of a threat to us as we continue to climb. Eventually, we reach the top of the mountain and see the beast for ourselves as it sits beneath a tree crowned with ice. We decide to try to talk this one out, so we turn back into our normal selves and make our way towards the creature. Before we can reach it, however, some shadow beasts decide they want to set up a mountainside retreat on top of us, so we have to carve through the unwelcome visitors first. Once we are side by side with the mountain man, we see he is easily 20 feet tall and as broad as a house. His thick fur offers excellent protection from the weather, but the real surprise is his genial nature. He talks to us in broken Hylian, but is easily understandable even through his thick tusks. He calls himself a Yeti, and even has some jokes about being on a spiritual journey to find ourselves up here on this remote mountain. We're genuinely charmed by this affable, goofy creature, and eventually we get around to telling him why we're really here, which is searching for the broken shard of mirror. He confesses that he recently found a shiny piece of mirror up on the mountain and took it home as a gift for his wife. He invites us to see his home and to see it for ourselves, and then skates off down the mountain on an icicle. We follow suit and begin to iceboard our way down the path, enjoying the thrill of the ride and the rupees to be collected along the way. After a truly enjoyable ride down the mountain, we arrive at the Yeti's home to find a massive mountainside manor that looks like it was built long ago by human hands. The manor is splendid, even in its dilapidated condition, with dozens of rooms, high ceilings, and ornate accoutrements like portraits, tapestries, and gilded suits of armor. The manor is grand on the outside, but the inside hosts enemies aplenty, and many of the rooms are snow or ice-bound. We head inside, and after dealing with a Poe in the entryway, move into the living quarters where we find a much smaller Yeti sitting by a roaring fire. She introduces herself as Yetta, the wife of Yeto. She's been feeling under the weather ever since the mirror shard entered their house, so Yeto has been going to Zora's domain to get reek fish for a signature soup that will help her feel better. Yeto is in the kitchen preparing the soup, so we head back to talk to him and get a move on with finding the mirror piece. He tells us the mirror shard has been locked up in their bedroom, and that Yetta put the key in a safe place somewhere in the house. While we're here, we go ahead and try some of his signature soup that's bubbling away in a cauldron the size of a small pond. It tastes like fish stock, but with some extra ingredients could easily be a delicious stew. But culinary delights are not why we're here, so we talk to Yetta again and points us to a corner of a room of the house where she thinks she stored the key. She kindly opens the appropriate door, and we head into the Snowpeak Ruins to find our key. The Poe in the atrium isn't the only enemy lurking around, and after some annoying puzzle solving involving an icy floor and some heavy blocks, we find ourselves in the snowy courtyard of the manor. The ghostly ice wolves appear to have made a den for themselves here as well, and we take our own wolf shape to teach them a lesson about who's the alpha around here. We also take the opportunity to look around with our heightened senses and find a chest that contains a small key buried in a snowdrift nearby. As we continue moving through the ruins, we encounter loads of icy enemies, including many freezards, which encase us in solid ice if we come into contact with them, some new enemies called chilfos, which look like ambulatory ice sculptures, and some colossal giant freezards, which blow icy breath and can't be hurt by any weapons we currently possess. Snowpeak Ruins is even more sprawling on the inside than it seemed to indicate, but we quickly find ourselves lost among the many rooms and blocked passageways of the manor. The map Yetta loaned us is valuable, but with so many passages blocked by ice, we find ourselves frequently using our wolf form to dig under walls or look for buried chests containing more keys. A great discovery comes in the form of some abandoned cannons that must have been left by a garrison when they abandoned the place. The cannon can launch a projectile through the thick walls of ice and opens up new pathways for us. We eventually make it to the chest that Yetta believes she put the key to the bedroom in, only to find an Ordon pumpkin instead of a key. Confused, we head back to Yetta, but stop by the kitchen first to give Yeto a key ingredient to improve his fishy soup. Yetta points us to a room on the opposite wing of the house and again opens up the appropriate door for us. We continue our exploration of the ruins until we find ourselves in a long, narrow hallway with a couple suits of armor. As we pass by the armor towards the door containing the chest, one of them comes alive and destroys the other suit with a massive iron ball and chain. The possessed armor has apparently decided that we shouldn't have access to whatever's in that room and has taken it upon itself to pulverize us with this intimidating weapon. The hallway is so narrow that we can't get around the heavily armored foe without getting whacked by the swinging iron ball. Seeing as we value our lives, we look for other ways to attack the advancing foe. Arrows and the claw shot and even bombs are useless against the advancing enemy, but the ceiling of the hallway has some claw shot targets that look promising, so we use our claw shot to get above the swinging arc of the ball and drop right down on top of our enemy. Luckily, the tail of whatever is encased in the armor is sticking out of the armor shell, so we use the Master Sword to do some damage up close. Pretty quickly, the iron ball is flying through the air at us, and we have to retreat quickly before losing our head. We get the drop on the Dark Hammer a couple more times, and eventually it succumbs to our legendary blade, dropping the suit of armor like a sack of bricks and leaving its massive ball and chain behind. We decide to take the weapon with us, as something with that kind of heft seems like it could be very useful around here. The next room doesn't hold the key we want. Instead, we find a wheel of goat cheese. Wondering why none of this stuff is in the pantry where it belongs, we head back to Yeto to help him finish up his stew and get the lowdown from Yetta on where in the world this key could be. She gives us one final location, sure that the key is in the chapel on the second floor of the house. So we start our third foray into the house armed with our new ball and chain to help break through the ice and enemies in our path. The chapel contains a host of chilfos that shatter at the touch of the ball and chain, and finally contains the key that we're looking for as well. We use a cannon on the ramparts of the courtyard to blow apart a friezard that has taken up residence, blocking the entrance ramp up to the bedroom, and head there so that we can rid this house of the corrupting influence of the mirror shard. Surprisingly, Yetta greets us on the ramp leading up to the bedroom, saying Yetto's soup has fully healed her and wanting to help us given all the trouble that her inaccurate directions put us through. We follow her up to the bedroom and open the locked door to head inside and grab the mirror shard. Yetta leads us in and walks right up to the mirror shard on the opposite wall of the room. She talks about it in a very proud way, obviously taken with the beauty of this gift that her loving husband bought her. But as she continues to stare into the glassy surface, she seems to be fading away as she continues to absent-mindedly fixate on the glass. The room darkens ominously, and Yetta's voice eventually fades away completely, while muttering about the pretty mirror until her head does a full 360-degree turn, and she flashes an unrecognizable but horrendous face at us. Yetta is no longer standing before us. The kind-faced and sweet woman has been replaced by a demon with red eyes and tusks, and the thing screeches at us, causing the windows in the room to shatter and the raging blizzard to encase the room in ice. Yetta has been turned into Blizzetta, a Twilight possessed bringer of ice and storms, and she will protect the mirror shard with all the fury of a raging blizzard. She encases herself in a colossal sculpture of ice and slams to the ground to attack us, but our ball and chain have made short work of the icy obstacles in the manor so far, and we use it again to shatter her protective shell. Blizzetta won't be stopped so easily, and summons more ice to protect herself. She floats above the slick surface of what was the bedroom and creates a dozen sharp spikes of ice that she tries to impale us with. We use the reflective surface of the ice to see where she is and run for our lives across the slick surface to avoid being crushed. We use the ball and chain once again to destroy as many of the crushing spikes as we can, before Blizzetta summons them all into the air once more and tries to trap us in a ring so that she can crush us herself. We escape the broken ring and throw the iron ball at Blizzetta's icy armor once again. The ice cracks but doesn't break, and Blizzetta takes to the air once more, summoning another round of spikes to try and crush us. It takes 2 more strikes with the ball and chain, but on the third hit, Blizzetta's armor is shattered and she is thrown against the wall of the room, defeated. We watch from a safe distance as the demon face of Blizzetta fades and Yetta's kind face resurfaces. She falls to the ground, unconscious but appearing to be alive. We walk over swiftly to the mirror shard, and Midna snags it for safekeeping. It was shocking to see the corrupting influence of the mirror work so quickly and violently on the kindly Yetta, and we can only hope that the other shards are not in a place where they can wreak similar havoc on innocent people. As we turn to check on Yetta, Yeto runs into the room with concern for his beloved wife. He rushes to her side and scoops her up, which thankfully causes her to awaken. They look deeply into each other's eyes, and Yeto forestalls his wife from any apology about mishandling of the gift that he got her. He tells her the only mirror she ever needs is in his eyes, because he sees her as the most beautiful thing in the entire world. And if she ever doubts it, she need only look at herself through that reflection. The loving care these two have is undiminished by the hardship the mirror shard imparted upon them, and their outpouring of affection is balm to the world around them. We admire their love and dedication for a moment, but after grabbing the heart container, we depart Snowpeak Ruins to allow them some privacy. Our sights are set on the last 2 pieces of the mirror, which are said to be in an ancient grove and among the heavens. Unsure what those clues mean at the moment, we're just grateful to have helped these 2 peaceful beings to regain a safe place to live and love, and we hope that we can soon do the same for the rest of the Kingdom of Hyrule. All right, let's get into part 2, which is our takes, where we talk about this section of the game and how it made us feel. All right, this week we're covering primarily the Snowpeak Ruins. And Max, the reason that I've been so excited about this conversation and to have it with you is because I think from the very beginning-ish of this season, we've kind of been framing the conversation around dungeons and dungeon sections in Twilight Princess in terms of Arbiter's Grounds versus Snowpeak Ruins. Like, it just kind of, the conversation always just came back around to it's got to be one or the other, at least in terms of Matt's and my recollection. We're going to be talking about the dungeon more specifically, obviously, in the next section, but I want to send it over to you, Max, and just get your general thoughts and feelings on the Snowpeak section of Twilight Princess, the things that we kind of get up to in this section of the game. But also maybe a few brief thoughts on last week's area, the Gerudo Desert as well, the ways that they're similar and the continuing way that this game is opening itself up past what we saw in the initial portion.
Yeah, let's see, where to even begin. So I've been doing a lot of reevaluation of thoughts I came into the game with, RE Dungeon Order. I think I feel safe saying at this point that my actual favorite dungeon of this game ended up being Lakebed Temple.
Whoa. Wow. Hot take.
Arbiter's Grounds or Snowpeak, which were the two that I remembered being the best in this game. Now, there's still a few to go. So we'll see, maybe the Uku dungeon will take the top spot or something.
You mean the Nipple Chicken dungeon?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Also known as definitely not Skyloft.
But yeah, so Arbiter's Grounds, that whole section, we're kind of in the part of the game where I honestly feel like Twilight Princess gets pretty bad, other than the dungeons. After the mid-game climax, which is the when you get the Master Sword, basically, and the stuff immediately leading up to it, the game really shifts gears. Suddenly, you're in the state where you can do most side quests. You can do most exploration. You can get most heart pieces. And you even get major new side quests. That's when you actually start the Poe quest.
Right.
Which is a bit of a weird choice. But the problem is the stuff that drops off at that point is the stuff that I think Twilight Princess is best at, which is character-driven plot moments. Because in that arena, I feel that Twilight Princess is maybe the best game in the series. And as soon as it basically just drops all that off in this latter half of the game, and I kind of end up just wandering around this world that, compared to other Zelda games, feels fairly empty. And doing side quests that, compared to other Zelda games, mostly aren't really hooking me. But luckily, at the very least, in this latter half, we do still have a number of pretty great dungeons to go through.
Yeah, and it's really nice because I think, comparatively speaking, when we were at this point of the game in Wind Waker, it was sort of the opposite, right? Where there were a lot of side questy things to do that were a lot of fun. There was a lot of ways to spend your time on the Great Sea, but it really feels like the cadence of dungeons was missing a beat or two at that point, Wind Temple and Earth Temple were not really, to my mind, cutting it in terms of volume of good dungeons for the back half of a Zelda game. And so it's interesting to me that Twilight Princess would have the opposite problem. And I'm not, I couldn't tell you off the top of my head which way I prefer it. I'd obviously pie in the sky, best case scenario. It's both. I want it all, right? But it's an interesting juxtaposition for sure. I will say I definitely agree with you that the between dungeon sections of the game are starting to feel a little anemic to me. Matt and I were talking to each other yesterday. We were texting, and Matt said something along the lines of, man, this plot recap is going to be a pretty short one. And also the episode may not end up being all that long comparatively either, just because there was just not nearly as many events and set pieces and things that were kind of taking up time between the end of the last dungeon and the beginning of this next one, like a few perfunctory things, but really not all that much at all. And I think some of that comes down to the fact that in my mind, the whole Snowpeak area as a section of the map was bigger and more involved than it actually is. Like the whole exploration of the frozen mountains of Hyrule in this game somehow ended up being even more lean, perfunctory than the Gerudo Desert did. And the Gerudo Desert, as we said last week, was already not necessarily the most jam-packed full of things to do. So definitely a little bit of a wind out of my sails moment here. Would you agree, Matt?
Yeah, I mean, just following the scent of the reekfish in a straight line, more or less in a straight line. And like I did kill the 2 Poes, and I found a little cavern that I could dig into, but like there's like really nothing outside of the snowboarding minigame, which I actually like kind of really enjoyed. I thought the snowboarding minigame was cool, but like, yeah, there's like nothing to look at, do. And we talked a lot about this in the last Max episode, which was how front loaded this game is. Like all of the major set pieces, almost all of the major story beats, all of the major character moments, like all of this stuff is just up front, and it's so heavily loaded there. And now we're getting into 2 game pieces in a row where the stuff outside of the dungeon is really not much. Even our big cinematic that we saved for this week, which was really tacked on to the end of Arbiter's Grounds, that even only added half a page of plot recap.
And in hindsight, I'm actually really glad that we made that decision. Because frankly,
this would be like a 3-page plot recap.
Frankly,
otherwise.
We could use some things to talk about this week.
Exactly.
Right? Like,
yeah. Like there's otherwise we would just go, so we go to Castletown, we talk to Telmo, we go to the mountain range, we go catch fish, and then we go up the mountain range and we're at the dungeon. And like that's like there's nothing really to talk about there. And it's it's very odd. The pacing and the structure of this game are becoming what I remember this game at large being, which is uneven and odd and weirdly paced.
So now that you've mentioned it, Matt, I feel like it's time to talk about some plot, because if the actual gameplay that we're offered this week is, somewhat lacking, the plot offering, at least in terms of what it means for the lore of this game, is definitely not. It's a big old moment. It's one that we've been skirting around quite a lot, honestly, in our discussions about the plot of Twilight Princess up until this point.
Yep.
Because there's a pretty major spoiler contained in here.
Well, for sure. And we've kind of hinted at it a few times, but now we can outright say it. Ganondorf is our big bad.
Yeah.
It's not Zant. It's our boy G-Dorf.
Somehow Ganondorf returned.
Yeah. Well, seeing as it's the same Ganondorf from Ocarina of Time, which we can now really talk about timeline implications and everything. So this being our Ganondorf from Ocarina of Time.
Yes. From the child timeline of Ocarina of Time,
where Link and Zelda were able to thwart him prior to him entering the Sacred Realm when Link pulls the Master Sword in Ocarina of Time, which causes the timeline split. So this is the Ganondorf that is stopped before he's able to lay hands on the Triforce.
Yeah.
However, somehow the Triforce is still split and he still maintains possession of the Triforce of Power.
Yeah, which he should not have had, given your explanation of the timeline as
and the explanation that we know to be true from Hyrule Historia, which is canon in Zelda.
Because Hyrule Historia has notably never created any lore or continuity issues of any kind.
For sure, yeah, never once. But anyway, so we now know that Ganondorf is our big bad. He has the Triforce of Power somehow. That is not really explained. To my knowledge, I don't think that's explained in the game. So I'm sure
one of the sages phrases it as a divine prank.
Yeah. And it's very interesting to see that happen. And, Ganondorf gets straight up impaled with a magical sword and just kind of shrugs it off and is able to kill a sage with his bare hands before being banished to the Twilight Realm via the Mirror of Twilight that is operated by the 5 remaining sages, who are not, by the way, the sages that we awaken in Ocarina of Time.
Yeah, they can't be, because we never awakened to them in the
exactly.
Child
So
timeline.
these must be either the original sages who maybe were killed in Ocarina of Time when Ganondorf took over the Sacred Realm. Maybe he wiped out the original sages, which is why we had to go awaken the new ones. I think that's fairly good headcanon for me.
Well, I think, and Max, I want you to weigh on this too, because the lore implications they're interesting to talk about, even if we don't get any concrete answers to any of this stuff. But my read on this is that the role of a sage is something that is like somewhat inherited throughout the history of Hyrule. And so the spirits of older sages are the ones that we're seeing here. If we want to put it in like Avatar terms, like the spirit of the Avatar has not passed to a new body yet, I guess. Something kind of similar to that. I think that makes the most sense in terms of all the slight inconsistencies that this cutscene presents from what we know to have happened in Ocarina of Time. I think this is probably the easiest one to come up with some convenient headcanon for. What do you think, Max?
Yeah, I mean, I have the same read on the way Zelda continuity treats sages, which is that it's almost like a divine role that is assigned to people through destiny, but happens to be assigned to similar bloodlines. Like, that's kind of the pattern they've used throughout the series. I've always thought like this is an interesting inflection point for the series, because in A Link to the Past, and then in Ocarina of Time, and then finally the last time in The Wind Waker, they seem to be building up a set of mechanics for how the Triforce works, right? Like A Link to the Past, it says when you get all 3 of them, you can have a wish. And Ocarina of Time says if someone has an unbalanced heart and they touch it, it splits. And then The Wind Waker says whoever gets to touch it when it's full gets to make the wish. And it's all like it all matches, it all works up, it doesn't contradict itself. And then starting here in Twilight Princess, they seem to kind of throw out all those rules, and they're like, okay, the Triforce is like a symbol of destiny and doesn't really have rules anymore, and nobody knows how it works. It'll even cross timelines, right? Like Ganon got it in the adult timeline. I guess he must get it in the child timeline as a divine prank now. Like way back in the day, we used to spend a lot of time arguing on forums on the internet and Zelda sites about how the Triforce worked. And then I haven't seen nearly as much of that.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
They stopped building it up.
Well, and because at some point they just stop relying on the Triforce as a plot device in that way. Like I know, games after this one do touch on it, but it becomes way less of a going concern the further that you get into the Zelda series.
Yeah, and to be clear, I don't think it's a bad thing that they kind of tossed out some of those rules and kind of just went with it as a destiny symbol.
Sure.
Because it does let them tell different stories over time.
Yeah, I definitely kind of agree with that. And it's one of those things where I don't want to minimalize the desire of fans to put some very firm rules and to create some consistency in like methodology around these things. Because that's one of the elements of fandom, right? When you love something like this, it's fun to try and break it apart as much as you can. Yeah. That being said, I think I've mentioned this before. I am one of those people who appreciates broad consistencies in the Zelda series, and is also very comfortable with non-specific generalities in some of those mechanics. Like I think that's totally fine. Matt, I know that you were kind of coming from a different headspace with that particular conversation.
Look, I I like concrete answers because I think it tells I like it when stories connect. And I've said this a lot. And like, I like seeing the through lines of things, and I like knowing where things lay in a timeline. I like canon. I like canon. I know like can sometimes be a dirty thing in some fandoms, but like, I think canon is good. I think to know where things are, how the world works, how things happen and why they happen a certain way, and knowing the order in which they take place. I think those are fun things to me. That's coming from someone who my favorite subject in school was history. And like, I like to know these things, and I like the interaction that it creates with the world at large. So, you know, all that being said, I don't have a problem with the fuzziness that comes with Nintendo's handling of Zelda canon at large. Like it creates really interesting conversations, which is why we're able to have these segments of our pod. So like, I don't have a problem with it. I would prefer more concrete, solidified things, but we don't have that, so I'm not going to sit here and complain about it. You know?
Yeah.
I think the fuzziness is actually really important, because it gives enough gray area for the fandom to just chew on that topic forever.
Yeah.
It's always been one of the most popular topics of discussion amongst Zelda fans, and I think it always will be. And it's because they don't give you all the answers, but they do give you just enough answers to whet your appetite for it and to like see the outline of connections. And you're like, okay, if that's the big connection, then what are the little connections? It's fun. It's fun stuff.
It's a tricky balance, and I think that overall the series rides that line really successfully. Let's frame the conversation more specifically within the context of Twilight Princess, because this is a very big pivot for this game. We all of a sudden have a lot more answers. We've got answers to a lot of story teases that have been dropped up until this point. We knew that Xant's power was not necessarily native to his people. We knew that he had somebody that he referred to in his own words as his god. And in some ways, to me, it feels appropriate for that to be Ganondorf. I think that that's a very interesting framing of the Ganondorf character because, you know, for one reason, Ganondorf is usually operating up until this point and a lot after. Ganondorf is kind of operating as a solo agent just with underlings, right? And I know that that's still somewhat happening here. Like when you boil it down, that's still what's happening here. But I do think it puts Ganondorf in this very interesting position of being the man behind the curtain for a lot of the game, which is a fun gear for him to be in, I think, just on paper.
Yeah, I mean, the thing where Ganondorf is the man behind the man is so ubiquitous in the Zelda series that, like, there's a trope named after it on tvtropes.com, right? Hijacked by Ganon. And I kind of hate it a lot because it robs interesting new villains of their agency and their chance to shine and, like, their interest. Really tired of it.
For the purposes of the conversation, can we also say that we put Demise in that category as well?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
I would.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I will say that Twilight Princess maybe does it more interestingly than any of the other Zelda games that do it. Because there's actually detail and story and plot around how Ganondorf interacted with this minion and why it matters to the story. And that's usually missing for others.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I am not at the point yet, and we'll see how my own thoughts and feelings evolve as we get further into the story. I'm not of the opinion right now that this development is necessarily undercutting Xant as an effective villain. Maybe that's just because we have yet to see a moment where Xant feels weakened by virtue of this extra context. Like, Xant has still been a very creepy and excellent character who feels powerful and dangerous in his own right. So I don't think that this reveal necessarily does anything to nullify that. Are you kind of on a page with that, Max? Or?
At this point in the game, not at the game overall.
Right, yeah.
Right. Yeah, I would say so.
Okay.
There's a little bit of it because like you after this moment, you do understand that Zant is a secondary villain.
Yes.
So like that does have an inherent downgrade to it in terms of like primacy in the story. But it's not too bad yet.
Okay. Yeah. Matt, how about you?
No, I mean, I would agree with that. Knowing that Zant is no longer the end goal. Like, we've operated the entire game so far, ever since Midna told us Zant's name, ever since we saw the cutscene where Zelda is retelling the story of how Hyrule Castle fell, and we see Zant's imposing figure. Like, at that point in the game, Zant is the end all be all. He is who we're gunning for. He's who we're up against. And really, until this moment, that has all been true. Now, knowing that he's not the end all be all, that even if we stop Zant, it's not going to mean anything if we don't also stop Ganondorf. Like, that does defang him quite a lot. It doesn't make the things that he's done so far less impressive, but the sight is no longer set on Zant. The sight is set on Ganondorf, and we have to get to Ganondorf by going through Zant.
Yeah.
So, that's all. That's, to Max's point, that's like frustrating in some ways. And it wouldn't be frustrating if it wasn't so, like Max also said, if it wasn't so common in the series at large. Like, it just feels like here we are again. But Zant is still, at this point in the game, a really fantastic bad guy. And I kind of wish that Ganondorf wasn't in this game, because I think it would have been really interesting for Zant to be the bad guy. And at this point in the game, Nintendo has made the case that Zant is a good bad guy to have.
Yeah.
And he's a really good bad guy to pit Link up against.
Mm-hmm.
And I struggle a little bit to see why they felt it necessary for Ganondorf to be the main villain outside of trying to homage Ocarina of Time the way that they do with Twilight Princess.
Sure. I do think that if you're gonna start introducing Ganondorf into the story, then at least this cutscene is a pretty effective way to do it. Like, we're seeing a very dangerous looking version of Ganondorf here. We're seeing a version of Ganondorf in his human form that looks maybe even a little bit more feral than he normally does.
Feral was exactly the word I was going to use.
Yeah. Like, that's usually a gear that we see for like post Triforce transformation Ganon. Right. But this moment when he gets stabbed with the sword of the sages, and then the Triforce of Power exerts itself, and he basically gets an extra life. Right. He puts an extra quarter in the machine and gets a 1-up. It's actually like a very scary and impressive moment, and the way that the whole scene is blocked and portrayed, especially with the music, is very impactful. I really freaking loved how, after he gets stabbed with the sword and he's coming back to life, and the sages are in like, oh shit, what do we do mode. I like that the music that's playing is the same music when you're trying to escape Ganon's tower at the end of Ocarina of Time, when you and Zelda are like running down the spiral staircases, I thought that was like a fun callback.
I didn't really even make that connection like consciously, but you're totally right. That was a good touch.
Yeah.
Do you think that moment is when he gets the Triforce of Power in the cutscene, or do you think he already had it?
It's tough. I think that is the moment that the power of that piece of the Triforce comes to live within him. But to your earlier point, Max, I think that the implication here is that Destiny had assigned Ganondorf to be the owner of that piece of the Triforce. And so at the end of the day, I think it sort of maybe comes to the same thing, but like, I don't know. I'm glad that it's not explicit in terms of like, oh, there's a moment where a golden triangle comes out of the ether and floats above Ganondorf and like melds with him. Or
Man, that would have been so cheesy.
I know. Right?
That would have been horrible.
Yeah. I like that it's kind of a question.
I do think back to 2006 when I first got to this cutscene. And at that point, I had my suspicions that Ganondorf was coming, but it had not yet been confirmed for me. So when this cutscene started, I was like losing my mind. I was like, wow, it's Ganondorf. And like the story implications were wheeling through my brain at light speed. And like it worked really well in the moment for me at that time.
Right.
It was amazing.
Well, because especially at that time, Twilight Princess was kind of fulfilling a promise to the Zelda fan community, which was, here are the things that you loved about Ocarina of Time, just a little bit more modern. And the introduction of Ganondorf looking much the same way that he does in Ocarina of Time, just with a bit of a glow up, the same way that other characters and locations get, it's not hard to see why that would have played really well in the moment with a lot of people, because it's just another link in that chain of like the mission statement, or that the supposed mission statement of this game, which is Ocarina of Time,
but adult and
better, or more. I shouldn't say better.
Definitely not better, but more.
Yeah, but more.
Well, they were trying to do better.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, they did not succeed.
Yeah, exactly. So, do we have anything else that we want to say about this cutscene generally, or the plot implications that it has?
It confirms that the backstory of the Twilight, I forget the term for them, the Twili, happens prior to Ocarina of Time. Kind of in the far history.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I do think that's actually a fun thing to touch on, because the history of the Twili is, I think you kind of alluded to this just a little bit earlier, Max, when you were saying that one of the things this game actually does do pretty well is to set up stakes and to set up historical context around this dynamic between Ganondorf and Zant. And around Zant as a character specifically, we've learned a lot about the Twili in the last few weeks. And now basically the story has more or less kind of unfolded to give us all the bullet points that we need to know basically what happened, which is that the Twili, right, were banished to this Twilight realm, which, by the way, is also the place where the people of Hyrule were banishing their worst hardened criminals, right?
Yeah. Australia fact. The Twilight Realm was the Australia of Hyrule.
Oh, the spirit of Cody Davies descended on the podcast and dropped an Australia fact.
Oh boy, that was a good one, Max.
Yeah, great.
Very good.
Yeah. Which, it's not that the Zelda series would ever be the series to delve into like some of the ickier like ethical implications of any of these things, right? But if you wanted to think about it, there's some pretty dark stuff happening here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It does kind of do an important thing where it sets up the Twili as victims.
Yes.
Yeah. I think
they
that's
were
really
happily
true.
living in the other side of that mirror, and then they freaking sent Ganondorf to them.
Like truly inherited our mess.
Absolutely. and like it begs the question, did the sages know that there were people living in the Twilight Realm, or did they truly just think that they were throwing Ganondorf into a hole and shutting the door on top of him? Like, I think that's a question, right?
Yeah. It makes the sages look fairly ineffectual, right? Because so obviously there's that whole element to it where their split-second decision-making caused apocalyptic circumstances for an entire civilization, but also just the very fact that, like, one, they couldn't finish the job, they couldn't kill Ganondorf, and one of them died in the attempt.
Yeah, and then they threw him into the Twilight Realm, which caused not only the Twili to be subsumed and conquered by Ganondorf via Zant, it also caused this entire mess that we're enduring in Hyrule. So, like, they doomed two entire civilizations to a total catastrophe and, like, couldn't do their job.
Would you call it a calamity?
I would. Yes, call it a calamity. Yes, I would.
Cool. Yeah. No, I do think so. These are all somewhat subtle layers. There's no character who's like popping up text bubbles, laying all of this out for you hyper explicitly, which is fine because I don't think that Zelda is a series that needs to rely on that sort of thing. Now we're back to that whole conversation of fans, peeling these layers back themselves and like finding the emotional weight in them without Nintendo kind of having to drag you through all of that emotional substance by the nose.
Yeah.
So.
I think another interesting thing that I've been thinking about with this in relation to the sages is the light sage, who's not Rauru theoretically, is the one that tells you that Ganondorf is who we're fighting. But the water sage is the one who attempts to execute him and the one that dies in the attempt. So like it's odd that we kind of have a hierarchy of sages in Ocarina of Time that's kind of subverted a little bit here.
It is interesting because if any of these sages are the same person as we knew in Ocarina of Time, it would be Rauru, right?
Yeah, you would think.
Yeah.
Were there 7 sages or 6 sages in this cutscene?
6. There's 6, and then one dies, and then there are 5. Because if you look up at the medallions, it's the 6 sage medallions from Ocarina of Time,
and Zelda is always the 7th sage,
right,
who's not represented. Yeah.
Right? Yeah, exactly. So yeah, it was 6. But
who knows where the holders of the Triforce of Wisdom and Courage are in this scene? You'd think they'd be there.
Yeah, well, it does make you wonder. It's like, is this now the situation where those pieces of the Triforce are now being like genetically passed down within bloodlines, or are they out in the ether somewhere just waiting for the right people to come along to inhabit, or how does any of that work?
And to Max's point, why is Hyrule royalty not present at the execution of their greatest enemy? Like, generally, you would think that the execution of a treasonous invader would be public spectacle, or at least overseen by the ruling monarch, or, you know, as Max said, the holders of the other pieces of the Triforce.
Yeah.
Like it's odd that this all happens the way that it does. It seems very hush hush, very rushed, very half-assed.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how we got here.
In my headcanon, there's a weird layer to this whole situation where Ganondorf, who is from the desert and has spent his entire life growing up in the shadow of the Arbiter's grounds, now like finds himself at the end of his life there.
Yeah, that is true. It's very weird. I don't know. Yeah, there's so much to dig into here, but I think we should probably move on at some point to talk about.
That sounds good. It's the big moment. This is truly the hinge on which the story of this game turns.
For sure. Yeah.
I wanted to give it the space to really breathe, but
totally agree.
Now we understand what the Mirror of Twilight is. We kind of understand why it's so important for us to get it. Let's move on past the Arbiter's grounds. All right. Max, I know that last time you were on the show, you said you had a few points that you wanted to get into, and I believe that one of them was related to this game's version of Castletown, which is our next location after this. So I'm going to turn it over to you. Take us where you will.
Yeah, okay. So I'm kind of curious. I'm going to ask you two, where do you think this Castletown kind of ranks amongst all the other Zelda villages in the series?
Let's see. So
just roughly.
I'm going to do a verbal accounting of what those really are, just so that I'm keeping everything at top mind. So we've got Ocarina Castletown, we've got Clocktown, we've got Windfall Island, we've got Skyloft. Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom don't necessarily have an analog to this.
Yeah, they're kind of their own style.
Yeah. Am I forgetting about any major ones? I know I'm omitting
Kakariko Village in Ocarina.
Yeah. I know, and
we could get into the 2D one.
Yeah, I was gonna say I'm completely omitting top downs from consideration right now, which actually Castletown and Minish Cap probably deserves to be part of the conversation too. But you know what? I am gonna say that among all of those, it's probably number 2 for me.
Like second best.
Second best, yeah. Behind Clocktown.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I've got a few reasons for that that I'll get into after y'all answer the questions yourselves.
I rate this one pretty low.
Really?
Like
okay.
it's I don't really like it. I think there's like 2 or 3 points of interest, and that's Telma's bar and the shop that Mallow buys. Like, I guess Agatha, because she gives you lots of rupees, but like overall, I think it's kind of it's not a place that I really want to be. I think most of that is down to the way the camera moves around in Castletown. It's super horrible.
Okay, so there I do agree with you. Actually moving around this version of Castletown and the way that the camera moves with you is really janky, and I don't like it. I think it feels very unpolished and very frustrating as you're like changing directions that you're moving within the space. But,
yeah.
So agree with you there. How about you, Max?
I would put it at the very bottom of the list.
Wow. Okay.
I think it is easily the worst town in a 3D Zelda game.
Really?
Which is why I was so surprised when you said 2. When you said 2, I was like, oh, you mean second worst. Wait, no, he means second best. What?
So as I say that, I'm now... So it's either 2 or 3, and it's in direct competition with Skyloft for me. With Clocktown being a clear number 1. So I think that Ocarina of Time Castletown is... it's fine. I've always thought that Ocarina of Time's Castletown is fine. To me, this version does everything that one does, but just a little bit better with a few more things to do, with the exception of an archery minigame, which I do miss having here. So the reason...
Which one do you think feels bigger between those two?
This one for sure. Just in terms of space?
I guess like the experience of being there while you're playing the game, does it like feel like a
for sure,
expansive space?
100%. To me, it 100% does. It does not feel bigger than Clocktown. But I would say that it feels bigger. There are a few different things going on here for me. One of them is that this version of Castletown feels very populated, and I know that 90% of these NPCs are non-interactable and they're just there for scenery and for set dressing. But it does help give this space a feeling of being lived in and of being the capital of a civilization. Like, I think it's kind of effective in that way. Maybe it's just because I haven't explored Castletown all that much in prior times that I played this game. But on this playthrough, about every time that I go and spend any amount of time there, I'm finding something that I didn't know was there and hadn't noticed previously. For instance, I had never played the hookshot star collecting circus minigame at all. In my 3 previous playthroughs of Twilight Princess, I had never been in that building, never played that minigame, didn't even know it existed. And I just kind of found it one day while I was wandering around this time. I really, I don't know, like, I think that there are more points of interest as well than you were necessarily giving it credit for, Matt. I mean, so yes, there's Telma's bar, there's Mallow's shop, we've also got Giovanni's house, we've got Agatha's house, we've got the doctor's house, which I know there's not necessarily a ton to do in a lot of these places, but like there are NPCs in all of them that you can interact with and that have like, I don't know, quirky little character moments. Like it just feels more populous. It feels more functional. It feels more true to life for what a town like this would be than some of the others. Obviously,
it definitely feels populous and crowded. I'll give it that.
Yeah. Like obviously Clocktown is the end all be all just in terms of like how much juice can you squeeze out of a town space in a Zelda game. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think that this is pretty successful. I like it.
No, I'm super glad that you have a opposing viewpoint here because that makes it more interesting. So for me, well, I don't know. Do you have thoughts you want to share first, Matt?
No, I'm interested to hear yours. Let's go.
Yeah. Okay. So for me, I feel like the heart and soul of a good Zelda town to me is there's a couple elements that have to be there. And the most important one is the characters, right? There need to be interesting, notable characters that like just looking at them create stories and they're memorable, and I interact with them in ways that let me, like, even if they're not a deep plot or whatever, like maybe they have cool body language and that helps portray their personality. And so that's one. And the second one is I need to be able to like move around the town and feel moments of discovery and surprise. Surprise is really important, I think. which is, it sounds like you experienced with the circus tent this time around mini game, which probably was an awesome surprise to find that. And to me, this town is lacking in both of those things. It has all of these nameless, faceless, mostly personality-less characters wandering around, and it's got a lot of bustle and crowd, but it doesn't have characters that I'm latching onto as I walk around here. And like I contrast that even with Ocarina of Time's Castletown, and I feel like the characters in Ocarina of Time's Castletown, which there were a lot fewer of them, stood out to me more. And have more like gesticulations and seem to be belonging where they were in the environment more. And then the other thing is just I generally find this environment to be very uninteresting to explore, because it's like there's 3 alleys or 2 alleys, like something like that. I forget exactly how many. And then you can see on the map exactly where the points of interest are. There's a little, spot here where there's a bigger square, and then there's another square, and then there's another square, and each one of those squares is a house or a mini game. And that's kind of it. I never experience surprise when I'm wandering around in this town, and it feels really claustrophobic, because it's all of it feels like just being in alleyways, other than the large and bustling but empty feeling middle.
Yeah. I will say there's a really weird thing that does happen when I'm moving around this version of Castletown, where you get kind of funneled in some ways. Like, I'll start in one area and I'll move down an alley and come around to another area, and then move into the center and then move directionally around that. And in some ways it's just kind of like an on rails sort of feeling, there's not a whole lot of feeling of freedom of movement and exploration, which I definitely do agree with you about. I don't know that I had clocked it as like a negative necessarily. But it definitely feels more claustrophobic in a bad way than Clocktown, or even, now that I'm thinking about it, Skyloft, which has legitimate exploration opportunities within that space, right? And Clocktown does too, in fairness, to a lesser degree, but yeah.
Clocktown, the surprises I mentioned, Clocktown has so many of them.
Yeah.
So the other part of all this for me is the state of the town feels really incongruous with what's happening in the story to me. Like, every time I play this game, I'm in Castletown, I'm like, why aren't any of you reacting to the giant yellow diamond that is encasing the castle? Why aren't any of you like wondering about the fact that everyone in the castle is gone? Like, why doesn't anyone care that much? There's a little bit of this about like, the trade routes to Kakariko being gone, and like no one's commenting on Kakariko having half its population destroyed. Like, it kind of just feels like it's separated from the status of Hyrule.
There are a few very vexed Gorons who were very upset about the bridge to Kakariko being gone.
The Gorons are like, they stand out because it's like they're the only characters that notice anything.
Yeah,
and they're the only ones that care or even try to do anything about it. So they're the ones that fix the bridge and break down the stone barricade to the south, and like it's very odd to me that you're right, Max. Like, no one even comments when Hyrule Castle is encased by the Twilight Pyramid, and no one is like, "Where's Zelda? Is our monarch okay?" I feel like someone should be caring about that somewhere.
The government of our nation has disappeared overnight. Do we care? No.
Apparently not. As long as Malomart is giving us crazy good deals on red potion and magic armor, we're good.
He's saving the unwashed masses from the burden of inflated prices. Yeah.
A true capitalist hero right there.
Right. Yeah, exactly. These are all really good points. And I think that honestly, just from a breaking of immersion with the happenings of the world, that's probably the strongest one that I can think for why this is maybe not as well done as some others. And again, going back to Clocktown, like Clocktown is like steeped in existential dread over what is happening in the game at that moment, you know?
There's 1,000 little stories happening in Clocktown, and they're all about
the
moon falling.
Yeah, Skyloft not so much. So here you go. I'll amend my ranking. I still like it more than y'all two do, but I'll put it third behind Clocktown and then Skyloft. I think.
Yeah, I mean, you're allowed to like it.
No,
I'm not trying to convince you.
As I'm thinking about it now, I do think Skyloft is probably better, but I do still enjoy it. I think more than either of y'all do. That's not to say that I don't think that they could have done certain things better. And there's kind of an extension to this conversation that is the role that our quest givers, in air quotes, are playing in the story at this point, and how effective I think they are as characters. But we can get into that here in just a little bit, Max. I know that the floor is yours to make points.
Okay, yeah, no, so I'm pretty much done now with the Castletown topic. I got it off my chest.
Okay, cool, cool.
I'm glad we could help you do that.
Can't let things stay there for too long. It's very important. Yeah. So actually, let's go ahead and talk about these quest givers real quick, because our journey to Castletown, basically the reason that we keep coming back here after dungeons now is to go meet up with your quest giver for the next one in Telma's bar. Well, actually, that's not correct. You don't meet up with them in the bar. They're absent from the bar, and then everyone who's still there says, "Hey, this person went off to this place. You should go look into that," right? And it's like, okay, well, that seems like a pretty clear indication of what I'm supposed to go and do next. And so Ashe is our quest giver for Snowpeak Ruins, and following that lead, we do go and we meet her at the entrance to the mountain range, right? Once we come through Zora's domain. And that's about the only time that we see her in this whole section. And Auru was very similar. We saw Auru for like 2 seconds right before we get into the desert, and then never again. Until now, when he's just kind of like, "Oh, hey, how'd that desert thing go that I sent you off to do?
Everything cool over there?"
Yeah. And it's like, "No, Auru, everything is not cool. It was a ghost prison, and it was terrifying." But anyway, it's a little disappointing to me, honestly, at this point, because when we were first introduced to these characters in the Wolf Link section, right, when we saw them all starting to congregate, and we had the tease from Telma of like, "Hey, these are my badass friends who are all grouping up together to do something meaningful to help the land of Hyrule," right? They sounded, I mean, we've used the analogy, going to use it again. They sounded like the Order of the White Lotus for the Legend of Zelda series, right? They had big, badass secret society vibes. And I'm finding it very dissatisfying now that the format we seem to be falling into with these characters is they show up to stand in one place at the beginning of the next area that you go to. They give you some cryptic dialogue about what might be happening there, and then you just go figure it out, and you never see them again until you catch up with them again in the bar, because they just like shooped out of, like, they thought they had a super important thing to go and be doing. But it must not have been that important, because the second that they couldn't figure it out, they sent you to go do it instead, and then they went back and had a pint, right? It's unfortunate. Like, I really wanted more for these characters than this. For Ashe and Auru, I don't remember if it's any different for Russell or the nerd. I don't remember his name. Shad. Yeah. But for right now, it's not great. And especially for a character like Ashe, who has like such a cool design and a really cool...
She's so cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ashe looks great. And her stated backstory was awesome.
Yeah.
Like,
I totally agree.
Yeah.
Keep going.
And we get none of that. You know, her stated backstory was, I was raised as an only daughter by like a militant father in the mountain range. You know, he had no sons, but he raised me as a soldier, and I'm a little rough around the edges, but I know my way around a sword, and I'm a badass. And it's kind of like, I really would have liked to see a bit of that. I don't know. Like, this feels like a very strange time for the Zelda series to be abandoning escorts in dungeons, right?
Right. Yeah. Like, Ashe could have been easily the most badass escort of any escort mission ever.
Right?
Like one that actually does stuff and helps you with things. Yeah.
It would have felt like she was escorting you.
Exactly.
She's like a head taller than Link is.
Dude, she's really big. She's a big girl.
Yeah. Put me in your backpack and carry me, Ashe. Except that doesn't happen. I don't know. Matt, do you...
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. Like, it's weird that she goes up there, she's wearing her Yeti snowsuit, and then gives you a drawing she made, and then, I guess, off to Telma's bar for the rest of the episode. Like, okay, see ya, I'm going to have a pint. Like, okay, thanks for nothing, I guess.
Thanks for this terrible drawing of a snowman.
With a red fish. Like, where did she get the color red? She hastily sketched it. Where did she get the color red?
Ashe goes nowhere without her Crayolas.
It just makes no sense. It's so dumb. Yeah.
It does. It makes me wonder if they had bigger ambitions and for some reason they like had to cut them. But I don't have any evidence of that. Other than that, what they do have feels really lacking.
Well, and it's so weird too. We're verging dangerously close to talking about dungeon critiques. Since escorting is not a part of this dungeon at all, I don't think it's actually getting there. But it's weird because Wind Waker, in my opinion, had actually started to somewhat refine the concept of the escort character. In some pretty meaningful ways. Medley being very successful.
Makar!
Yeah, Makar being somewhat less so, but still better than
Totally
Naruto.
less so?
Right, yeah. And it's interesting to me that there were not like advancements on that concept made here. Because I think that it could have happened and it probably should have happened.
Part of what goes on, you remember the last episode I was on, I talked a lot about how the art style causes them to require a higher bar for like movement and like character animation and stuff.
Yeah.
I think it just meant that it was too difficult to like have these NPCs that moved around and ran around and fought and did stuff. Like I think that was just not particularly feasible for them in this art style because they would have had to be so much more polished than they had to be in the Wind Waker.
Yeah, no, I think that's probably right. Yeah, it's an unfortunate reality of the situation, and I acknowledge it, and it's still not a completely satisfying answer for something that we could have had that would have been pretty cool, I think, but it'll do for now. So we are now in the Snowpeak area of Hyrule, and Max, am I incorrect in stating that this is the first instance of an ice biome in mainland Hyrule in the Zelda series up till this point? Not counting Frozen, Zora's Domain, and Jabu's Fountain and stuff in Ocarina of Time.
Yeah, I think so. I'm trying to remember...
Because
never mind. I was gonna say Link to the Past, but that's the Dark World.
Yeah.
That's a small section, anyways. Yeah, I think it is.
So that was one of the things that captured my imagination so much when I was playing this game for the first time, because it felt very different within the context of Hyrule specifically. Like we had Snowhead or whatever in Majora's Mask, and that was great, but to have a snowy mountain range in Hyrule that was kind of contrasting the more volcanic mountain range of Death Mountain was a really fun and cool idea for me when I was like 14 or whatever playing this game for the first time. And I still think that it's a really cool idea in theory. The Hebra region of Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom kind of proves that, I think. I don't think that this is the way that you do it. I think that this is boring. And if you're going to introduce a whole new biome area to Hyrule, it's got to come out the gate stronger than this. Like this was somewhat disappointing to me. Like I wanted more happening here, be it environmental puzzles, be it just more space to traverse, more exploration to do. You know, give me more caves to explore. Give me a mountain village or something. Like I know that I'm sitting over here just saying like, you know, do these things for me. I'm a gamer and I'm entitled to all the best stuff that I can think of, right? I know there's like cost associated with these things. I know that. I
mean, you're trying to articulate a feeling of something lacking.
Yeah,
and that's fair. Okay, yeah, I was gonna say that I basically agree with everything you just said. I don't know that this even captured my imagination back in the day, like you just described it doing for you. I think that it's kind of a microcosm of the problems that all of the world design of Twilight Princess has for me, which is that it generally feels, it's like a weird combination of like too big and empty, but overall feels small. And like, it feels like there isn't stuff to find, and it feels like there aren't choices to make. Even like the biggest sections of Hyrule Field mostly end up feeling like a narrow corridor you're going through in this game to me.
Yeah. You know, there is, now that I think about it, there is one section of the Twilight Princess overworld that bucks this trend. And I wish that more notes had been taken based on the success of that area. And that's Lake Hylia. I actually think that Lake Hylia in this game actually has a few fairly fun things to do and to discover. And manages to actually successfully feel both vast but also explorable at the same time in a way that Hyrule Field doesn't, Snowpeak doesn't, Gerudo Desert doesn't.
Yeah. I kind of want to rapid fire a question at you two and just like kind of one word answer for each of these. There's a bunch of them that I'm going to ask in a row.
Go.
So the first one is, which one feels bigger to you when you're inside it and exploring it? Ocarina of Time, Hyrule Field, or the three main Hyrule Fields in this game?
Matt?
Feels bigger is Twilight Princess, but not in a good way.
Okay.
Feels bigger to me is Ocarina of Time. Even though I know it's not bigger, it conveys meaningful scale better than Twilight Princess.
Cool. And what feels bigger, Death Mountain and Goron City in Ocarina of Time, or Death Mountain and Goron, whatever it is, in Twilight Princess?
Ocarina of Time.
Ocarina of Time.
Yeah. Okay, what feels bigger, Arbiter's Grounds and the desert in Twilight Princess, or, you know, the Gerudo Fortress and the desert and Colossus in Ocarina of Time?
Again, Ocarina of Time. That one took me just a second longer to decide on, simply because the approach to the Arbiter's Grounds in Twilight Princess, I think, does have a very impressive sense of scale, and is sprawling is maybe not the right word, but like it has a magnitude to it, and I do really appreciate that. But like, you know, Ocarina of Time, you're talking Gerudo Fortress, you're talking the Desert Oasis, you're talking the Wasteland, right? I mean, Gerudo Canyon or Gerudo Valley. Yeah, it's no competition. It's Ocarina of Time.
Yeah.
Yes.
So yeah, you're basically both hitting on the same thing that I keep thinking when I play this game, which is that like, I know that physically speaking, in terms of how long it takes my character to walk across it, or how big it is in comparison to my character, Twilight Princess's world is bigger, like significantly bigger. But when I actually think about the experience I'm having, everything feels tiny. It feels cramped to me in Twilight Princess. Like all of it.
Well, it almost feels like the decision was made to trade four quarter-size bubbles for 1 2/3 size open space, and it leads to a feeling of emptiness and inconsequentiality, right? Or to a feeling of I don't know, like everything we're talking about, where these spaces are nominally big but don't have enough activity to support the feeling of actually being vast. Because they're not vast in the way that we consider game spaces to be, especially in the modern day, right? But like they tried to convey a sense of magnitude that they just weren't able to really do. And I think at this time that this game was made, if you didn't have the resources or the ability to make something that was 2 or 3 times as large as Gerudo Desert or Snowpeak are, then the better approach is to just have 4 small bubble spaces, and like the traversal between those spaces gives you an artificial feeling of magnitude, even if they aren't that big, just laid out on a piece of paper.
Yeah, I pretty much agree. I wish that I had a very clear cut like diagnosis, and I could be like, this is why it feels smaller to me. And I don't have a simple answer.
A lot of it is aesthetic, I think, right? Like when you're in Gerudo Valley in Ocarina of Time, it's a very small space. But you have also got a skybox that is artificially creating a sense of vastness around you. You have you've got the body of water that leads to somewhere else on the map, goes down to Lake Hylia, right? But just I don't know, like the feeling, like there's kind of an artificial sense of magnitude to that space, and when you're in an actually larger space that feels less. Man, I'm not stating this very well, but I do think that it's down to the aesthetic of what you can achieve in a small bubble space and the way that you can trick a player into thinking that it feels bigger than it actually is, versus the space actually being bigger but feeling more artificial.
So what it is for me is there are more things to do in these locations in Ocarina of Time than there are in Twilight Princess. Hyrule Field may be square foot by square foot or pixel by pixel, whatever you want to call it, larger in Twilight Princess, but the amount of things that there is to do, that there are to discover, things that are important, is so few and far between within that space that it just feels empty.
See, I feel like
therefore not important or large.
I feel like Twilight Princess's version of Hyrule Field, though, is the one instance where this is kind of not true, where Twilight Princess's Hyrule Field has actually got a lot of things to explore and discover. There's caves, there's bugs to collect, like there's a lot of different geography and paths to different places. Hyrule Field in Ocarina of Time is pretty empty just in terms of activities. The reason that it feels bigger to me is because you're able to see all the identifiable landmarks of the world of Hyrule from most any place in that version of Hyrule Field, right? Like you can pretty much always see Castletown, Death Mountain, the forest trees, the path to the desert. They're all visible in Ocarina of Time's Hyrule Field at any given time, and that helps it to feel kind of vast, right? I still think it feels better than Twilight Princess, but I think every other area that you're talking about, every other area that we're talking about right now is doing exactly what you're talking about, Matt, where it's trading things to do for extra space. Like the Gerudo region, especially, when we're talking about those 4 bubbles, right? Gerudo Valley, Gerudo Fortress, the Desert Wasteland, the Desert Oasis, right? There are set activities to do in each one of those 4 places. Sometimes it's only 1 or 2, sometimes it's more than that, but altogether it feels much more consequential than the time that we're spending in Twilight Princess's version of that same place, even though it is bigger.
Okay. Fair enough.
Yeah. I think a major part of it is when you stumble across something in Ocarina of Time, and this is partially dependent on your past experiences and whether it's 1998 or 2023 when you're playing it. But things felt new and surprising and novel. Like there was a sense of kind of wonder, like anything could be around the corner, anything could be in that hole that you're about to jump into. And then in comparison, Twilight Princess feels very rote. Like there are a lot of heart pieces and caves scattered around, but when you find them, nothing about them is going to surprise you. Nothing about them is going to make you go like, whoa. It's just, there's a heart piece. I see a hookshot target. I don't have a hookshot yet. I'll come back later.
Yeah.
Right. And that contributes, and like the lack of things to find that are exciting and feel wondrous may not seem directly related to perception of space, but it it reduces the sensation of like density of good experiences that you're having. Which does make spaces feel smaller.
Well, and I think it's one of the reasons that the Great Sea in Wind Waker feels so. It feels vast and it feels brimming with undiscovered possibility in a similar way, because similar to what you were saying, Max, where in Ocarina of Time, there could be anything in this cave or whatever that I'm about to go into. In the Great Sea, it's like there could be anything on this island that just popped up on the horizon, and it feels like a very good use of space in that way, even though the Great Sea itself is not all that large, really, when you really break it down. It's weird because a lot of that space is completely unused. It's just ocean. You're just spending that time traversing in a boat, right? Whereas in Twilight Princess, you have full range of motion. You've got combat. You can ride a horse. You can fight enemies in most of these places, right? You're not restricted to a mode of travel, but it still feels less consequential because like the I guess the signposts, like the milestones that you're getting to within that space feel less interesting as you're exploring. So yeah, and I've always kind of felt this way about Twilight Princess's overworld. And I don't think it's an uncommon criticism. Like a lot of people talk about Twilight Princess's overworld in this way. And I think they're mostly the conversation tends to center mostly around Hyrule Field, but it does apply to the Gerudo Desert and it does apply to Snowpeak as well. Yeah.
Okay, thanks for indulging my desire to talk about world design. Another topic I wanted to get off my chest.
You know what? That's good. This is why we bring you a notable professional video game designer on this show, because I think you kind of help us talk through these things in a technical way, and that gives us like actual measurable guidelines for the conversation, and helps us to really kind of frame these things in quantifiable terms. So that's great. Do we have anything else that we want to say about the Snowpeak area before we move out of it? I mean, we haven't even really talked about the quest that gets you through the mountains to the dungeon, which is you have to go catch a fish and you have to learn its scent. This to me was actually really frustrating because I went and caught the fish and then just like once I had the fish, just hoofed it back on up to Snowpeak and kept getting caught in the snowstorm. And I was like, what am I doing wrong here? I don't understand. Did I miss something? Of course, what you had to do was to turn into a wolf and smell the fish in Zora's domain, and then you get the scent. But I don't think it was like very explicitly stated, and that's also not a process that you're having to do enough in this game to where it was just second nature, like, oh, of course I have to go do this. And
right. It never quite feels like a mechanic. It always feels like a scripted narrative thing.
Right. And on top of that, I thought we weren't supposed to be turning into a wolf super close to NPCs. But it feels like that rule is just sort of abandoned here. Like there's Zora's right there. Like, why am I allowed to transform into a wolf here? Like, why is Midna not getting in my ear? Like, no, don't do that. You're going to scare people like she does other places. It was kind of confusing.
It took me an hour to figure out how to even start this little side quest.
Really?
I was wandering around the Zora area trying to figure out how to get to the mountain, and I was like, I had this incorrect memory of it being a high up passageway. So I spent a while searching high up in Zora's domain, and then I was like, okay, I remember I need to talk to the prince, and I remember he's in Kakariko, so I should go talk to him. And then I did that, and like he wasn't there, and then I kind of went on this wild goose chase, like chasing these half remembered incorrect things, which isn't even really the game's fault so much. Like, I wonder if I would have had the same problem at all if it was actually my first, like, if I didn't have these memories.
Yeah.
So that was my goofy little experience there.
Yeah, I mean, I when I stopped back at Kakariko Village, I think last chapter, at some point, I don't remember why, I went and talked to the Zora. I went and talked to Rallis, so I knew where he was going to be. So as soon as one of the Zora people said, like, oh, Prince Rallis is the only one that's ever caught that fish, I was like, okay, cool. So teleport back to Kakariko Village. Like, this whole sequence It took me maybe like 5 minutes. The part that took me the longest was I didn't remember that I needed to sniff the fish to get its scent, even though it said it reeks. I was like, okay.
I do think that's one of the funnier Zelda text bubbles, right? Which is like, you caught a reek fish. It reeks.
You're like,
hey, funny.
Yeah,
Okay,
it does.
cool. Yeah.
So I caught it, and then I thought I like vaguely had the inkling that I was supposed to take the fish and like bait the Yeti to come down and get it from me and then follow him up. I don't know why I thought that, but I like as soon as the fish dropped to the ground, I tried to like catch it with a bottle, and then it dropped in the water, and I was like, oh, I'm supposed to sniff it. Duh. I'm a wolf. So I caught it for a second time and then sniffed it and followed it. And it was, I don't know, man, it was fine. I think all of it was fine until you get up to the snowboarding when it actually gets like interesting again.
Yeah, sure. And I do think that is the moment that this whole playtime for me kind of kicked into slightly more fun gear, right? Because you're meeting an interesting new character. The design of Yeto is really excellent. Like I love the art direction for that character. He looks goofy, but not too goofy, you know?
Yeah.
He's not.
I'm still a little bit afraid of him.
Yeah. Yeah, because he's massive.
Yeah, dude, he is a big guy with huge tusks.
Yeah.
He's got big teeth.
But, you know, his dialogue is quirky and funny, and I don't know. I think he's a fun character. And of course, that kicks off this fun little icicle snowboarding minigame, which is definitely a precursor to shield surfing and Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. And actually, I was very surprised. For some reason in my head, I remembered that the process of controlling the icicle surf was bad. And I remembered just like struggling with it in past playthroughs of this game. And this time, maybe it's just because I've been shield surfing in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. But I got it on the first try with no problems. And it was fun.
I did fall off one time, but I'm glad I did because I went back and netted over 100 rupees. So it was worth it.
Snowboarding is awesome. Like I feel weird saying this, but I think it might be the best feeling movement in this game. Way better than Epona.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, so much better than Epona.
And kind of more fun than walking around as Link or Wolf Link. Like, it's great. and I also think it's better than shield surfing in the two more recent games.
Okay.
Like, I find those a little hard to control.
Really?
This is easy to control. It's just fun.
Interesting.
Like, you can turn more easily in Twilight Princess snowboarding than you can in Tears of the Kingdom.
Does this get leveraged into a minigame of any kind if you go back later?
I think it does. I think you can go back and do it for rupees.
There is a mini game when you come back.
Cool. Well, I'm glad that it wasn't wasted then. Because you're right. It's too fun to just do once for narrative purposes and then never revisit again.
On the snow trek leading up to here, just really quick, because I know we're an hour and a half into this. I think it's the most fun I have had as the wolf on the overworld in this game.
Yeah.
Because it feels appropriate to be a wolf here. Like I was like, oh, it's kind of a cool twist that like the way you survive the cold was to be in wolf form. And then like it feels like a cold place you're going through, and like the music and the cold mist, you know, it felt pretty thematic. It ultimately wasn't fun to explore it other than just going down a corridor, but
I will say there was a fun moment that was also kind of a derp-a-dur moment for me, where I was trying to do all of this as Human Link. I was trying to go up the mountain, and the ice wolfos were there. I was trying to fight them, but I'm in the snow and I'm moving slowly, and it was to the point where like I was just getting hit by the ice wolves, and I was not doing well. And in my mind, I was thinking, was I supposed to get like a new set of foot gear for this? Was I supposed to get like snow boots or something? Because this is miserable. Like, this is terrible. There's no way I'm supposed to be doing it this way. And then after a few minutes of fighting wolves, it clicked. And I was like, oh boy.
Oh, Lyndon.
That thing that you can do in this game, the gimmick around which this entire game hinges, in which you transform into a wolf. Maybe I should try that out. And from that, like once I had face palmed to an appropriate degree, I had a very similar feeling, Max, where I was just like, yeah, this makes sense. Like I should be playing as a wolf here. And I think that it's done pretty well. So similar experience.
Agree completely. Yeah. Good Wolf Link section overall.
Last thing I want to say about this section before we move to the dungeon is I really like the final approach to the Snowpeak Ruins when you're coming down the icicle snowboard chute, right? I like seeing this structure in the very middle of the mountain range. Like I think it has a very cool aesthetic sense of place when you're coming up to it, and it feels very incongruous with everything else around it, right? It feels much more refined and it feels much more civilized, I guess. And I had a lot of interesting questions about what brings a Yeti to live in a place like this, you know? And we'll get into that discussion a little bit more during the actual dungeon map. Does anybody have anything else they want to say before we kick into that whole section?
Nope.
This is part 3, which is the dungeon map where we analyze this week's dungeon from mechanics to music and more. This week's dungeon is the Snowpeak Ruins. Matt, I'm going to pass it to you first. I would love some general impressions around the Snowpeak Ruins.
Yeah, I think this is a really, really cool set piece for a dungeon. It's haunted house, a la Forest Temple, but an actual house.
Forest Temple came to mind for me too.
Forest Temple, but an actual house. It feels like someone lives here, and obviously because they do literally, you meet them both. I like this dungeon a lot. It's like there's some minor gripes I have. Number one being, every time you open and close the door, it's a loading sequence, and there are literally a bajillion doors. So, like, that's a very minor gripe, but like, it's just fun. It's fun to talk to Yetta and Yetto, and Yetta directing you to the soup ingredients was kind of funny. And like, you would think that would be annoying, especially to me, because I don't like goofy silly, but like, that was funny.
It's hysterical because this would be me. Like if somebody
this is literally you.
If somebody came to my house and I was just like chilling in the living room and they're like, hey, I'm looking for this thing. Where should I go? I'd be like, oh, go check this room. They would go to that room and they would find like
cheese.
Yeah, a wheel of cheese. It's like and I'd be like, oh, damn it.
Well, try this other place. It's Ritz crackers. Oh, cool. Can you give me those? I actually was kind of wanting some cheese and crackers. Thanks.
Like, hey, I'm glad you found this pumpkin in that room. Hand that to me and go try this other place.
It's this dungeon's really fun, man. I like it a lot. It's a really good time. It's a well-designed dungeon. It's a puzzle heavy dungeon. It's got some combat, but not a lot. The combat that it does have is good for the most part. It's just good. I like it a lot. It's really fun.
How about you, Max?
I also love this dungeon. Way back in Skyward Sword season of this show, we had the Sand Ship episode, and I did this amazing breakdown of like what makes a good Zelda dungeon and like what do they have, what goes into making it. I don't remember most of what I said, so that was a good episode. You should all go listen to it. But but I do remember that I described all the stuff they have to do. Right, they have to like introduce mechanics and have you like work up through harder and harder versions of that mechanic, and they have to make you feel like it's your own discoveries when you solve puzzles, and they need to make you feel smart, and they need to do all these things. And then it's like hard mode dungeon design to, on top of all that, make the space feel like a real space, right? And the Sand Ship did that. Where like the whole dungeon space made sense as an environment that actually would exist in that world. And even more than that, this is the best example of this in the entire series, is Snowpeak Ruins, where like the story of this place, of these Yetis, all makes sense. Every room you go into makes sense as a room that would exist here. All the mechanics of the dungeon make sense as real things that would happen in this space, in this world. And so like it just hits this great high point of like believability and immersion that is far beyond the norm for Zelda dungeons. Also, have you heard do you know the Danish word hygge?
No.
Hygge. So it's basically it's a word for that feeling when it's snowy and cold outside and you're inside at a fire.
Ooh, I love that feeling.
Those two things
It's a good feeling.
creates a sense of warmth and coziness and happiness and family and like that's what hygge means. And that's what this dungeon has the feeling of every time you go in and see Yita. And like that's like kind of that heart of this dungeon, is that moment where you go back to this cozy living room, basically, and the kitchen. You go through the kitchen too, and you get the hygge feeling, which is like totally a weird thing to have in a Zelda dungeon, and it really works here.
Well, and it also kind of helps to sell the narrative of Yeto and Yetta and this feeling like a lived-in space, but also giving you a sense of safety around those characters, which is one of the reasons that the boss encounter later is so effective. But yeah, it really gives a certain domestic feel in the early part of the dungeon, and as you kind of continue going through that area, that feels very starkly contrasted to the actual place, the main play spaces of the dungeon. And I think that contrast is very, very effective. Real quick, now that we've all given our general thoughts, I'm going to do that thing where I break down the dungeon in a kind of succinct way before we proceed further into the conversation. Snowpeak Ruins is set in a ruined mountain range home. It's a manor home, many rooms. It's got 2 floors. It has a central courtyard area around which all these rooms are arranged. The front area of the dungeon is the main living space of Yeto and Yetta. Yetta is sitting before a fire and on a couch, and she's not feeling well. The whole fiction of the dungeon is that Yeto and Yetta have found the Mirror of Twilight. It infected Yetta with a sickness, and so they sealed it in their bedchamber. And so now Yeto is trying to make a pot of soup to make her feel better. And so, yeah, the first few rooms of the dungeon are very cozy and cheery, like Max was saying. Yeto and Yetta are characters that we come back into contact with throughout the entire course of the dungeon. We keep getting sent on different quests to try and find the key that unlocks the main bedroom where the Mirror of Twilight is being held. And that takes us to all corners of the dungeon. One of the main mechanics of this dungeon is using cannonballs to blast apart giant blocks of ice that are blocking our path. There are interesting little switch areas where you can move cannonballs from one area of the dungeon to another and then bring them to different cannons to gain access to further reaches of the dungeon. It is a somewhat symmetrical dungeon in its layout, but it doesn't really feel that way because the interior spaces are arranged to feel like rooms of a house, and so it does feel labyrinthine in some certain ways, but it is all kind of radiating out of a main courtyard area. Enemies include Ice Wolfos, Ice Keese. I don't know what these little skatey icicle enemies are called that skate around on the ice. And then the
Hockey pucks.
The what?
Hockey pucks.
Yeah, sure, the hockey pucks. And then the big daddy versions of those that spit freezing breath at you. The mini boss of this dungeon is does this guy have a name?
Dark. I think he's a Dark Knuck.
Nah.
Hold on. He does have a name. Moment. Let me pull it up. Continue.
The mini boss of this dungeon is an immense ironclad knight wielding a ball and chain. That encounter takes place in a very claustrophobic area. The main boss of this dungeon is Blizzetta. And we'll talk more about Blizzetta here in just a little bit, but that fight takes place in the locked bed chamber that we've been trying to get to for the entire time, where the Mirror of Twilight is being held. I think that's it's a somewhat succinct summation of what's going on here.
Yeah.
I just want to say, I think that the atmosphere of this dungeon is so excellent because it's answering certain questions right off the top, right? We're immediately clued into a lot of the realities of like, what is Yedo and Yeda's life like here? This is their home. This is how they live. But at the same time, we have a lot of questions that go along with that because you get the feeling that this is a space that they moved into, right? Like a disused area that was previously home to like a mountain military regiment or something, and was abandoned, and that Yedo and Yeda kind of came to take up residence in. And there's a lot of things that go into that. The set dressing is one of the big ones. There's cannons and ramparts scattered all around this space. There are armory chambers where we have stored cannons and suits of armor. There are living spaces that are clearly abandoned, right? Furniture that hasn't been used in years. It's very interesting. And like the lore of what this space was used for before it became the home of Yedo and Yeda is something that's really fascinating to me. And I'm glad that it's not explicitly explained, because all that it's really doing is contributing to a very intriguing overall aesthetic for the space.
Yeah. So, by the way, the enemies in this section are Freezards, who the hockey pucks are Freezards. Are the big ones that spit the ice are Freezards. Then the mini Freezards are the hockey pucks. And then the mini boss is called Dark Hammer.
Okay. He doesn't even have a hammer.
Nope. It's a ball and chain.
Doesn't even sort of have a hammer.
Cool name.
Yeah, but he doesn't have a hammer. So, Anyway.
Yeah.
There you go.
Cool. Yeah. I mean, Matt, I don't know. Like, what's your read on the use for this space, like the history of this space past Yedo and Yeda living there?
Yeah, I think it makes sense that Hyrule as a kingdom would have outposts on its borders to monitor the borders of the kingdom, right? Like you want to have outposts where you can check up on things. Gondor had all of these, where they would light the beacons.
The beacons of Gondor are lit.
Exactly. So that's kind of what I'm getting from this. Is like this is just an outpost on the edge of the kingdom to keep an eye on whatever is going on out there and make sure that what's going on out there doesn't come into the kingdom in a bad way. I think that's cool. It's I don't know why it would be abandoned, other than maybe it used to not be as inclement up there, so it was easier to keep staffed and stocked, and supply lines may not have been as hard to come by. And now it's just a constant blizzard up there, so it's not worth it. But
yeah,
that's kind of what I kind of took away from it.
Yeah, I agree. It's interesting because this dungeon is a very puzzle-heavy dungeon, but I wouldn't call it a puzzle box dungeon. We're not altering the main, defining layout of the dungeon in any meaningful way. The puzzle solving that we're doing is mostly contained to individual rooms, and the puzzles don't really branch out from each individual room very much. Would you say that that's an accurate observation, Max?
Mostly. There's a few puzzles in here where you do have to think about where rooms are in relation to each other, including one cannonball towards the end that you have to kind of carry a long way, and you need to kind of, like, I ended up looking at the map a lot and being like, okay, how do I get from that spot to that spot to that spot, and like, how do I get the cannonball to that spot, because it can't go through doors with me. It's like Eagle's Tower a little bit,
right?
Although this, more than the Game Boy game in 1993, it's really annoying that you can't carry the cannonball through doors in this one.
Well, especially because the doors all have knobs and stuff, right? Like
right.
They're regular doors. Like,
yeah, I as annoying as it is, I also thought it was really ingenious the way that they did it, where like you put it in the receptacle and then pull the lever from the other side. Like, the piece of coding to make that happen seems difficult to me.
And on top of that, I like that the position of a cannonball is kind of constant, right? Like if you drop a cannonball in one place in a room or in an area, it will still be there if you go to the other side of the temple and then come back.
And it's marked on your map with a little red dot.
Yeah, it doesn't reset.
Yeah. I like it as much as I wish, and I said this in Wind Waker of let them follow us through the damn door about the escort mission people. I agree that we should be able to carry the cannonball through the damn door, but at least this is kind of a cool mechanic.
That worth it for the good puzzle mechanic.
Yeah,
right. Exactly. Yeah. I do think that this dungeon has one or two things that I typically associate with having less fun in ice dungeons. One of those is ice,
the ice block moving puzzle,
ice floor moving block,
and it
puzzles.
starts with it. It's the first thing.
Yeah,
and my first thought when I saw it, I was we're starting off on a real bad foot here, guys.
I almost never like these, man. Like I really almost never do. I didn't like him in Ocarina of Time. I don't like him in Pokemon Gold and Silver. Like, I don't know. Max, are you a ride or die for ice block puzzles?
Nah. I think they're usually not very successful in Zelda games, partially because not because like the puzzle itself is annoying, but because the act of how you have to move your avatar around and interact with the puzzle is annoying. Like it's really slow. You need to reposition yourself by running all the way around the block. You need to do an animation. You need to it's just slow. I don't want to spend all my time on this. Especially if you get it wrong and you have to redo a bunch of it.
Yeah. Well, the cadence of it is laborious, right? Because you have to walk up to the block, push the block has to slide, then you have to sit back and be like, okay, did it go to a place that is beneficial for me? And then you've got to go push the block again, the block slides. Like it doesn't have I don't know, it just doesn't flow well. It's kind of a pain to go through this whole process. And if you don't pick up on the correct solution quickly, it can get very frustrating because then you're just stuck in this room pushing blocks around on an icy floor for 10 or 15 minutes. And
yeah,
I'm not sure that that's how anyone wants to be spending 10 or 15 minutes of their Zelda playtime. But
definitely not.
Thankfully, there's only one room of the dungeon where that is something that you have to do. You have to solve a puzzle within it twice, but it's not a repeating thing throughout the entire course of the dungeon. One thing that I think is far more successful here is the use of cannons. So one of the main impediments of progressing through the dungeon early on is that there are giant ice blocks that you can't blow up with bombs. You can't break them with your sword. The only way to break these things is to initially blast through them with the cannons using the cannonballs that we've been talking about. And then later in the dungeon, when you get the ball and chain, that can break these icicles as well. It's interesting because this dungeon, when you look at it on a map, has a somewhat open looking layout. But the way that they keep you contained to certain areas of it, depending on where you're at in the dungeon progression, I think is somewhat impressive.
Yeah, they do a pretty good job with that. There's a pretty natural sense of progression as you go through this. Although honestly, the biggest gating mechanism is Yida keeping doors locked and then unlocking them for you.
Right. Yeah. I don't know. It's weird because this is one of those dungeons that, to me, the map is not super helpful for me here. Like, I'm sure that it's successful. Like, I think it's giving a perfectly accurate look at the layout of the dungeon. But there's so many rooms and so many doors that can be very overwhelming to look at. And I will also admit that for some reason, the way that you go through this dungeon was kind of coming back to me very clearly while I was in it. I had a lot of recall for this space.
Really?
For some reason,
I had almost none.
I don't know why that is. I didn't have that for Lakebed Temple or for Arbiter's Grounds, especially for Arbiter's Grounds. When I was playing that last week, it really did feel like in some ways the first time that I'd ever played it. Not completely, but
Yeah. I had very little recall for this dungeon, which I'm glad for. I really enjoyed being able to experience semi-newness.
yeah. I made it through here pretty quick. Like, and there were some things, some time savers that I just found myself doing that I was kind of surprised about. Like, the second time you have to do the ice block puzzle to open up something on the second floor.
Mm-hmm.
I just kind of like went and did that as soon as it was available. It wasn't a situation where I got up to the second floor and was like, oh, I can't progress. I need to go back down and do the ice block puzzle. You know, I just kind of did it and it was done and I didn't have to worry about it again just because I remembered, oh, this unlocks something up on the second floor of this room.
Sure.
There were a few instances like that in this dungeon for me, and I think it contributed to me spending a lot less time here than I otherwise would have. I don't think that this is a brief dungeon. I don't think that it's a small dungeon. I don't think it's too short, but I did blow through it much faster than I did Arbiter's Grounds last week, which
I definitely did as well.
Yeah. Okay.
I think it is a little bit of a shorter dungeon. It's more compact. Like you go through a lot more rooms, and there's a lot more backtracking. And this brings me back to a point I brought up in our second episode, which was the Forest Temple, which is backtracking is successful in Zelda dungeons when you don't even realize you're backtracking. And I think this dungeon is like the epitome of successful implementation of backtracking, where you're going back and doing things and it doesn't feel like a chore. It feels like a new experience. It feels like you're doing important things and it's not a drag every time you're going through the room for the third or fourth time. So I think this is the epitome of good backtracking in a dungeon.
Max, how do you feel about that? Because to me, the line between good backtracking and bad backtracking is very thin. And I agree with Matt.
Absolutely. I totally agree with that statement.
Cool. I agree with Matt and where he landed on this dungeon's implementation of it. I'm curious if you feel the same way.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it basically depends on what's going on in the player's mind as they're backtracking. Like, are they thinking about a new question or a new problem that's in front of them as they're backtracking? If they are, then it doesn't feel like backtracking. And if they aren't, and it's just kind of the same thing again, but it's already been solved before, then it feels like backtracking. And whenever I'm going through rooms in this dungeon, even if it's a room I've already been in, I am generally thinking about some new problem in front of me. Like I'm trying to get to the room that I know is on the other side of this wall because the map told me. Or, you know, last time I was just kind of going from A to B, and this time I have a cannonball and I need to get the cannonball from A to B. And so I'm looking at the space differently. So even though you do spend a lot of time going through the same rooms a lot in this dungeon, I think it always feels good.
Yeah, I agree.
Unless you're stuck for a really long time, then you're like frustrated. But.
Sure, yeah. I will say there was only one place in this dungeon where I actually did get stuck for any reasonable amount of time. It was really frustrating. So there's a cluster of rooms that on the first floor lead you to getting the compass, and you know that there's also a key door coming off of that area of rooms, and you have to get through that door to go further in the dungeon. And I just couldn't find the key. Like I spent forever going back and forth between two rooms looking for this key. And I really just thought I was missing something. And it turned out that the final result of that puzzle, if you want to call it that, is that there is a treasure chest in the courtyard that is completely covered by snow. Like the top of this chest is not even slightly poking out of the snow. You've got to turn into Wolf Link.
The only way you would know it's there is the map tells you.
Right.
The map and the compass.
The map and the compass, which I did have, and that was how I finally came to that conclusion. And then you have to turn into Wolf Link, and then you have to go dig to get to the chest. And that definitely was kind of frustrating. Like in a dungeon full of pretty successful feeling decisions, that felt like the one moment that was a little cheap to me. Because I can't really think of an analog for that anywhere else in the game. Like obviously, as Wolf Link, sometimes you have to dig for things, whether it's just to get rupees or if it's to get into like a cave or something. But we've never had a chest that was hidden in this way elsewhere in the game before. And so it felt like it came kind of out of nowhere. That was a little frustrating. Once I got past that, like thankfully that's early dungeon. And so once I was past that, it was really just, it was smooth sailing from there and nothing but good experiences. But yeah, not the best decision that's ever been made in terms of how you find a key in a dungeon, but that's okay. I'm willing to forgive it on account of the other wins that are going on here. Like I think the further that you go into this,
so I've gotten stuck on that thing every single time I've played this game.
Yeah,
I was stuck on it for half hour this time.
I got stuck on it for about 5 minutes, but yeah, no, wow, half hour, really?
Yep, I was like wandering around these rooms over and over and over again, being like, I don't like trying all this stuff, trying to climb up shelves, trying to it took me so long to notice there was a new icon on my map, because like you said, Lyndon, I think not just in this game but in like the entire series, I don't think there's really other examples I can think of a progression requirement that you can only see by noticing an icon appearing on your map.
Yeah, it's not a part of the traditional Zelda puzzle solving language. Which, like, even though different games have different mechanics that add to that language, you know, there are still some constants that the series tends to sort of adhere to, and this was outside of that, which was frustrating. And it was even more frustrating because one of the two rooms that you are just kind of stuck in while you're trying to figure this out has got ice walls that you know stuff is behind. And there's a cannon in there. And so the whole time I'm thinking, like, I know this cannon only rotates 2 directions. But am I supposed to like put a cannonball in it and then just like drop a bomb at a certain specific time and maybe
try to time it right?
Yeah, maybe that shoots the cannonball at a certain angle that wouldn't otherwise be possible. Anyway, like thinking through all these things that like none of which you actually have to do. And then once I finally figured it out, it was just kind of like, all right, well, that was sort of dumb, but whatever, moved on past that. I will say, going further and further into this dungeon, I love the feeling of the dilapidated space that it all has, just like overturned furniture. It honestly feels It feels like a ruin, except people live here. It's a fun balance.
I love the way that every time I go into a new room, the question of like, what was this place? What happened here is like renewed in my mind.
Yeah.
I'm like constantly asking myself that question as I play and like looking at the environment. And I don't usually get to do that. Like usually when I'm looking at the environment, it's because I'm admiring how pretty it is, or I'm trying to find stuff or solve a puzzle. But in this case, I'm looking around for a story. And like like there's just so many rooms that like add a weird new dimension to the story. Like the chapel.
Yeah, there's a church in here.
Yeah. It looks like Sanctuary or something from Link to the Past, which is like the only other example of a chapel in a Zelda game.
Yeah.
Did y'all break all the pews in the chapel?
Yes, I broke all.
I broke all of them, and I thought something was going to happen, and it didn't, and I was kind of sad.
Lyndon.
Yes.
Did you recognize what the melody of the music is from?
Bum 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 bum. No, I didn't.
It's Canalet Castle from Link's Awakening.
What?
Whoa!
Hold on.
I'm like 90% sure it's the same melody.
Hold on. All right, we're gonna take a 2-minute pause on the recording, and I'm gonna pull up the Canalet Castle theme, and I need to see what's going on here. So as many times as I played Link's Awakening, I can see that being the kind of detail that would have gotten that would have flown under the radar for me, just because Canalet Castle is not a place that you spend a ton of time in that game. Okay. All right. It is super subtle, and it makes me wonder if it is an actual reprise or if it was a case of inspiration just being taken. because the Zelda series, when we're talking about musical themes, it's a story of like, sometimes we have very explicit reuse of themes, and sometimes we have echoes of themes. And I'm wondering which camp this falls into. Max, you are 100% the person to ask about this. Was this a Koji Kondo musical effort on Twilight Princess?
Mostly not. He was involved, but there were also one or two other composers involved.
I'm asking that, and I'm now wondering, was Koji Kondo a main musical force on the Link's Awakening soundtrack?
Nope.
Okay.
He did I think he's credited in it because he did the Zelda theme.
Sure.
But there were 3 other composers who worked on Link's Awakening, and mostly it was not Koji Kondo.
Do you have any idea if there's any consistency between the Link's Awakening composers and the Twilight Princess composers?
Nope.
Okay.
0 overlap.
Oh, wow. All right. Interesting. Interesting. It's weird because I can see somebody trying to figure out what the music should be for Snowpeak Ruins, looking back at the history of the Zelda series and thinking hey, here's this other instance of this abandoned, disused castle area.
Dilapidated castle. Yeah.
Yeah. It's maybe we should look at that, Yeah, very, very interesting. Man, you know what? If that was explicit, then I'm all for it. Anytime somebody feels like making any kind of throwback to Link's Awakening, I'm all for it. That's one of the reasons I love the Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom Hyrule Castle theme so much, because for some reason it's got the Ballad of the Windfish in it, and I couldn't tell you why, but thank you for doing it. I mean, makes no sense, but I appreciate you. But yeah. Anyway, so yeah, the overall aesthetic and feel of this space is really, really excellent. Let's talk about the main item of the dungeon, which is
the ball and chain.
The freaking ball and chain, which is maybe the most bizarre and badass item.
It's really intense, man.
It's really cool.
It's intense.
And I think that it's actually, I think that its practical combat applications for the remainder of the game are actually not that great, right? The way that I remember it,
it's so slow.
It's just better to be using your Master Sword.
Yeah.
But it's really cool. It's really, really cool. And it is so fun because, again, talking about Canalet Castle, Max, basically what we did is we killed the dude from Canalet Castle, and this game let us keep his weapon.
The boss Canalet Castle was the mini boss of this dungeon.
Yep. It's so fun because I love how its basic use is to allow you to do cannonball breaking of icicles anytime that you want, right? You could have done that with any item, but they basically chose to encapsulate that inside of an actual just weapon.
It's really interesting that they're kind of using this in place of fire arrows, right? This game doesn't have fire arrows.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I prefer this. It's not that I hate fire arrows. They're great. They're fine. Having a ball and chain is really cool. I mean, it's just it's a different gear for Link. This is a level of armament that we don't usually have.
It's a heavy item. A la Megaton Hammer, but way cooler than Megaton Hammer.
And it does act as a shield.
It does. It blocks projectiles while he's just kind of holding it there. He's
very useful in Chapel Room.
Yes, it is. And Chapel Room was actually pretty hectic. And we didn't even mention the icicle spear dudes.
I killed all those guys with the Master Sword. I didn't even ball and chain them. I just did shield bash, helm splitter, shield bash, helm splitter.
I did the ball and chain just because, again, sometimes you can get a few pews while you're fighting those guys. And it was all about clearing all the pews out of that room.
You gotta clear the pews. Dude, we hate those pews, man. They're so uncomfortable.
They're so uncomfortable.
Your butt falls asleep, your back hurts. They just suck. And those ones didn't even have cushions.
Having spent a fair amount of my childhood in very similar looking worship space accoutrement.
I was vindictive against those pews.
Thank you. Yeah. So anyway, The ball and chain to me is really fun. I'm curious to see how much I use this as we go through the rest of the game, because it's one of those items that is not, it does not lose all of its usefulness as soon as we leave this dungeon. Like, even though there's not icicle walls or anything that we have to break through later in the game, at least not that I remember, it is still just like you can just use it for combat if you want to do that. It does have applications, and it just comes down to, is this a good choice for me to be making as I'm fighting this enemy? Like, is it advantageous to me to be using the ball and chain versus a bow and arrow, or just the master sword, or whatever? And I don't remember the answer to that question. It's cool enough to where I'm going to try it a lot and see how it goes. And that's a mark in its favor, I think.
Yeah, I'm pretty much on board. It's cool. It's fun in this dungeon because every enemy in this dungeon is specifically designed to be killed by the ball and chain. And all the mechanics in this dungeon are also designed around it. So like, it feels amazing to get it in this dungeon. I really like the chandelier mechanic with it. It's just clever. Like, it's not a mechanic you anticipate. Like, a lot of times in Zelda games, you look at a hookshot target, or you look at a bombable wall, and you're like, okay, I know what I need. Like, I know what this is going to be. I just need to wait until I get the item. But with these chandeliers specifically, you can't tell ahead of time that this is going to be a thing you can do with them.
I think the only clue that you really get is that you can Z target onto them, which is kind of it's a hint, right?
Yeah, for sure.
But it was one of those things where I just remembered that this is what you were supposed to do. And I don't remember how long it took me to figure it out the first time. And I'm curious if people get hung up on it.
I mean, I'm sure somebody does. I think the Z targeting gives it away pretty easily, though. Like, and especially because you only really interact with them after you get the ball and chain. And people who have played Zelda dungeons, generally speaking, are aware that, like, use the item within the dungeon. You know what I mean? So I think I would think that it was not a big hang up for most people.
How did y'all feel about the fight against, what was this guy's name?
Dark Hammer. Dark Hammer. MC Hammer.
Yeah.
It's scary.
Yeah.
I think it's the scariest fight so far in this game.
I completely agree. This guy was effing me up, man. I had a really hard time against this guy. I couldn't get his rhythm down, and I was having a very hard time against him. He was very formidable, in my opinion.
Yeah, the fact that he's this like slow moving, kind of implacable force coming towards you in a small hallway, and you cannot run around him without like exposing yourself to the danger. Like, it's kind of like you kind of get this rising feeling of panic almost as he's like getting close to you, and you don't have any further to back up. At least that was my experience, and it took me a long time to figure out how to actually fight him.
No, I agree completely. I saw the hookshot things on the ceiling, and I tried that for a while, and he kept like hitting me off of them. And then I eventually like was trying to time it to where I would get up there, he would get underneath me, and I'd just drop in and then try to maneuver around.
But
like,
it's really
I kind of
weird
ended up brute
because
forcing this one.
Yeah, it's weird because having the hookshot targets on the ceiling, it sort of gives you an inaccurate read on the encounter, which is that there's some mechanic that requires you to drop behind the boss, and then that kicks off a phase where you can do damage to him. And that's not really the case. It's a little bit confusing. It's a much more fluid fight than that. Like, it really is just as much as you can dodge the ball and chain, you have to do that. And then whenever you get an opportunity to hit his tail, that's what you have to do. I don't know. Like, I don't think that's a bad thing necessarily. And I think the claustrophobia of this fight is a huge mark in its favor. Like, usually in Zelda mini boss and boss fights, with a few exceptions, we have a lot of room to maneuver. Like, you've got an arena basically, and you've got room to get out of danger and to analyze the situation. And with this one, you are just in a tiny ass hallway, and he takes up the entire hallway. Like especially once you factor in him circling the ball and chain above himself, like he takes up the entire span of the thing. So it's it feels very dangerous while you're in here fighting this guy.
Yep, I think it's great. I think it's probably my favorite mini boss so far.
I agree.
Although, actually, no, I don't know. There was the Dark Blade,
Death Blade.
Oh,
Death Blade.
crap! Yeah,
Yeah.
he was
Man,
Cool.
that I think the vibe of Deathblade, the sense of dread and impending danger and like horror aspect of that whole thing was better.
I think the actual mechanics of the fight.
I think the fight against Darkhammer is better.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. Just because it is so unusual for Zelda mini boss fights.
Yeah.
And I really do respect it for that. And also just because it is really fun to kill a person. Sorry, no, I don't. Let me. You
wanna take that one again? You wanna take that one again, bud?
Let me take that back just a minute. Okay. It is really fun to defeat an enemy and then be able to pick up their weapon. I mean, obviously, like Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom, that's old hat at this point. But at this point in the Zelda series, I mean, Wind Waker had done a little bit of this, but you had to basically chuck that item at some point. Like it didn't become a permanent part of your inventory.
Right.
This
becomes permanent and it's unique. And it's the same if you lets you fight the same way they were just fighting you. That's all pretty much unique. It's really cool.
Yeah, completely agree. Definitely a very fun way to acquire a dungeon item. Do we have anything else we want to say about the dungeon writ large before we talk about the boss fight? Max, you go first, and then I have another thing that just came to mind.
I was going to say the pictures around the castle.
There are lots of them.
There's a lot of them, and like some of them are like
spoilery.
Are they
spoilery?
There are pictures of the Sky Dungeon and the other recurring location from Ocarina of Time.
Are there? I totally didn't notice that.
And there's, I do. Now that you mention it, I remember that. And also there was Queen Rutella.
Right.
Yeah, Queen Rutella was all over this dungeon.
Why do they have so many pictures of Queen Rutella? I have questions about that.
Yeah. I really want to think that like these pictures are all carefully chosen to present a story. And I think they just picked random screenshots of cool looking areas and things from the game. Like, I don't get the sense that there was an intentional storytelling happening here. Yeah. And that makes me sad.
Yeah, it definitely just kind of feels like we needed some scenery. And so we took a few screen grabs and dropped it into these containers.
And I kind of hate it whenever games do that, where they just take screenshots of the game and put them in picture frames on walls, because it's like...
Yeah. I feel like
it feels weird.
When faced with this decision, maybe just go with, especially for this game, which was made in a pre-HD era, just go with some very abstract art, you know?
Yeah.
Probably the way I would.
No,
that was all I had on that.
So I will say that playing this dungeon on hero mode, it is very nice being able to go back to Yedo and
just
sample his soup.
Give me some soup.
And the process of like actually improving the soup as you go through the dungeon is a pretty fun one as well. Like the soup is pretty measly at the beginning. It only gives you 2 hearts, and then it gives you 4 hearts, and then it gives you 8 hearts as you kind of add ingredients to it. And it's great because, I mean, yeah, like obviously on hero mode, you're very restricted on your health regen potential. Whatever you come into the dungeon with in terms of potions and whatnot is kind of just what you have to work with. But it's nice because you can just go back to Yedo anytime you want and refill your bottle with completely free soup. And actually, so by the time you get to the end of this whole thing, 8 hearts of health regen is nothing to sneeze at.
Yeah.
It's basically just free red potion over and over again.
Sure. To the point where, like, if I'm ever low on stuff. Like I don't think I'm going to buy a red potion again for the rest of this game. I'm going to warp up to Snowpeak and I'm going to go get 8 heart potion from Yeto's soup cauldron and call it a day. Like, why would I spend the rupees on it? You know?
That's a good point.
Yeah. So I did think that was fun. Matt, do you have anything last minute?
No, I'm good. Max sounds like he has something to add.
Quick note. Did you notice that Yeto's hat is a saddle?
I did notice that Yeto's hat is a saddle.
No,
I thought that was hilarious.
Like I see it now, and that is hysterical. Yeah.
Okay, that's all
I love how every time Yeto, like you go back to Yeto with a new ingredient, he does this thing where he just like pushes you and it like flies out of your.
Give me pumpkin.
Yeah, exactly. It's like he's not being mean, but
he's just big.
I'm glad he's not the one who touched the mirror at the end.
God, I know.
Oh
right?
Man, that would have been terrifying.
Can you imagine? Speaking of people who touch the mirror, we finally get the bedroom key. We make it up to the master bedroom of the of Snowpeak Ruins, and the mirror, sure enough, is hanging there. Yeta looks into the mirror, and we have got what is another jump scare in a game that likes to really do those quite a lot. This one is. Man, it's really something. The moment where like
for Bilbo moments.
Right.
It's a real Bilbo moment. Yes.
Yeah. It's like I would very much like to hold it again one last time. Yeah. God, that scared the shit out of me when I was
in
10.
the theater. That was horrifying. Oh man.
Yeah. Basically, Yeta becomes Gollum in this moment, and so that kicks off the boss fight. Yeta is the boss under a new name. This is Blizzetta. And it takes place entirely within the master bedroom of Snowpeak Ruins, which is a large circular area. This boss fight, honestly, was a ton of fun to me. And I know that last week Sam said that she thought Star-Lord was maybe the best boss fight of the game so far. To me, Star-Lord has got some major competition with Blizzetta. Not necessarily in terms of mechanics, like the spinner race in the second half of the Star-Lord fight with the music and everything was really great. But I'm a sucker for two things. And one of those things is an easy path through the first phase of a boss fight. And with Blizzetta, all you have to do is hit, like in the first phase, all you have to do is hit her with the ball and chain several times, and as long as you're timing it right, you're moving through it pretty quickly. I appreciate that. What I appreciate even more is Zelda boss fights where we're utilizing a reflection to telegraph the location of a boss that is above you that you can't see.
Yeah, the spider Ganoned it.
Yes.
Yeah, it was pretty cool.
Well, and actually, it's not too dissimilar from the way that some boss fights were handled in Phantom Hourglass.
Yeah, you're not wrong.
Here is a positive reflection on Phantom Hourglass.
One of the few that we have, but here it is.
Yeah. but there actually are some similarities, right? Because what we have is a forced perspective situation where I'm not sure if you can go into your free camera during this whole thing. I didn't try
either. You're moving around too much.
Yeah. But basically what it's doing is it's doing the entire second phase of the boss fight at a different angle than the game is normally done at. It's kind of like a downward angle, and the floor of the arena is reflective. It's all icy, and you can see what the position of the boss is above you in the reflection of the ice. And I always think that that's really cool. I mean, it's hard to mess that up, honestly. Like having to pay attention to that degree is really fun for me, and I appreciated it here quite a lot as well.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that the first phase of this boss fight is really not. I didn't even move. Like when you have to hit her a couple of times with, and she's doing the hockey puck thing, going back and forth. I didn't even move, but then she turns into the giant ice cathedral thing and starts trying to drop spikes on your head, and that it was really fun. And I think it's really cool that you have to break a few of the spikes to make yourself room so that when she drops them all in a circle, you can escape through the one direction.
And I started off doing this the wrong way. I started off thinking that I had to break all of the little floaters that she has, and then that would kick off a damage phase. And so the first time that I did that, like I destroyed them all, and then she just spawns them up again.
Yeah,
it's like, all right,
oh well,
didn't do that right.
Yeah. No, it's a really, really good boss fight. I think overall, I still think Star-Lord was more fun and adrenaline pumping. I think this is just a well-designed boss fight, just all the way through. Just excellent game design, excellent boss design.
How about you, Max?
I appreciate this boss for a lot of the same reasons you two have just mentioned. I guess the one thing I'll add is I appreciate that it is kind of the optimal play is to switch to a wolf form when she's above you.
I didn't do this a single time.
Never did that. Wow, that's wild.
Yeah, because you don't slip on the ice when you're a wolf.
What?
So it's just way easier to dodge them. And I like that kind of like, it feels like an unforced, like natural reason to end up wanting to be a wolf Link, which is pretty rare in this game.
Well, the fact that you did that and had a good experience with the fight, and the fact that Matt and I didn't lean on that at all and still did pretty well, I think is actually a really big point in this boss fight's favor. The fact that you have options in that way is a strength. Like I really appreciate when you can kind of choose to tackle it. Like when you can choose to leverage the gimmick of the game to tackle the boss fight, but it's not necessary. I think that that's a really good decision to make. And yeah, it blows my mind that I didn't even think to try that. But yeah, awesome. That's a really good observation.
Yeah, I totally didn't try that at all. That's wild.
One thing I want to mention about this as well. So we've been talking about how the Star-Lord fight benefits a lot from the adrenaline and whatnot of the soundtrack. I love the soundtrack of the second phase of this boss fight with the organ.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
It's very ominous.
It is. And it actually, it feels cold and icy in a certain way.
Sure.
Which I do appreciate. But yeah, I'm not here to say that I think Blizzetta is one of the all-time great Zelda boss fights, but it's a really solid boss fight.
I totally agree with that. Yeah.
And I do appreciate the fiction, too, of the Mirror of Twilight being the corrupting influence over certain characters.
Yeah.
I think
it feels more corrupty than the Fused Shadows did.
Yeah.
Which is kind of odd.
Yeah.
And
also, once you finally beat Blizzetta, there's a happy ending for everybody.
Yeah, that was cute. I liked that a lot.
Yeah.
That was a great
adorable.
Zelda moment.
Yeah.
Having 40 hearts jump out of them.
Which, by the way, that is the first time I've collected a heart in hero mode.
Yeah. I think it's the only time you can.
Yeah.
It's great. It was wonderful.
And you get the sound effect and everything. It's awesome, And also, I love how the heart container that you get comes out of Yeto and Yetta smooching.
Yeah. That was cute.
They're not all bursting out of roast pigs.
Some of them come from legitimate love between two characters. Yeah, no, it was adorable. And yeah, I guess I just want to put a cap on this whole thing by saying that I think this dungeon is actually weirdly telling us a story. Like I know most dungeons are sort of telling a story where it's like, go in there, beat a boss, rescue a sage or something, get an item, whatever. This one was it had a whole narrative associated with it, which was like, Yetta is sick. Yeto is worried about her. We're trying to solve that situation at the same time as Link trying to get this Mirror of Twilight. And by the time we beat the boss, we've solved all of these things. I like that, it makes it feel a bit more organic than the endings of dungeons sometimes do.
Yep.
Cool. All right.
It's an all-time great.
Yeah, no doubt. All right. Well, let's go ahead and move on to part 4, which is Bloopy Trails, where we talk about interesting things that diverted our attention this week. I'm going to speak just for myself and say this is going to be a real damn short one. Like, Bloopy Trails this week for me consisted mainly of I hunted down a few golden bugs because I'm still trying to fund the Mallow Mart expansion to Castletown, and that's a good way to get some rubies. And then also I walked into the fishing hole
and walked right back out
and looked at the fishing hole for a second.
Did you not get the bottle out of the fishing hole?
No.
There's a third bottle in the fishing hole, and you don't have to pay for anything.
I don't like fishing. Like
but you don't have to pay for anything.
Okay.
You just, I'll tell you how to do it later.
I walked in there and I took one look at it and then realized that fishing minigames in video games are one of my least favorite things. I don't like fishing in real life.
Yeah, don't like any of them.
I don't like fishing in video games, and I got out of there pretty quick. But I will go back and get the bottle because that's a good thing to have.
Yes.
But I mean, Bloopy Trails were pretty light on the ground for me this week. How about you, Matt?
Cool. So while you are still funding Mallow Mart's expansion, I purchased the magic armor this week.
Good for you.
Yeah. I collected like 2 more bugs. And I got all 20 Poe souls, but I haven't gone back to Giovanni.
I did that as well.
Yet.
Giovanni is still not in good shape, but his cat is fine, and I think
that's all that matters.
That was the most important
Gengle?
thing.
Yeah, Gengle is the only person that matters in this transaction.
Yeah, I don't have much sympathy for Giovanni, but
no, he got himself in this situation. He's a greedy little bastard.
Yeah. But I'm pretty invested in Gengle not being frozen to Giovanni's head for eternity. So
yes.
Who do you think has the worst fate, Giovanni or the Sculptula family in Ocarina of Time, who have the exact same story?
Oh, God. I mean,
Sculptula family because spiders, gross, ew, bad.
Well, and also it was their entire family, right? Like Sculptula daddy had to watch. Yeah, like his children get turned into cursed spiders. But,
now, those are some toxic parents that everyone should cut off.
Yeah, at the end of the day, Giovanni, I guess, is still surrounded by his cat and lots of gold. So I guess he wins, but it's pretty narrow.
I found a bunch of heart pieces, none of which stick out in my memory. I tracked down like 3 golden wolves that I'd been neglecting. Got some really cool sword moves that I'm probably never going to use.
You say that. I have been finding myself using all of these combat techniques more than I recalled. Like,
nice. You are in hero mode.
That's
so that makes sense.
That's fair. Yeah.
Yeah, on normal mode, like I feel like there's this cool combat system in this game, and it's just totally pointless because it's never needed. Every once in a while, you'll have a boss that's designed to require you to do the Helm Splitter or something like that.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting that the more combat-focused recent games, Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, have ostensibly a very robust combat system, but didn't choose to employ learned techniques in this way. Because I think in most Zelda games pre those two, they actually feel fairly useless with the exception of hero mode, which we've been talking about. But just an interesting little point there. But yeah, Bloopy Trails, not such of a much for any of us this week, I don't think. Let's move on to something where we actually have something to talk about, which is Z-targeting, where we lock on to fascinating characters or enemies that we happen to cross. A few pretty decent picks this week, in my opinion. Matt, I'm going to be magnanimous and let you go first.
I am going to pick Yeto because dude loves his wife so much that he's going out in a raging blizzard to get her some fish for a stew.
Some stinky fish.
And takes really good care of her. He's a great husband, great role model for a healthy relationship out there in the world. Good guy Yeto. Really, really appreciate him and his very non-toxic masculinity. What a great guy.
There you go. Max, how about you?
I am going to pick Ganondorf.
Whoa! All right.
I think this cutscene and this chunk of the game is really cool and about as much of a character moment as we ever get for this Ganondorf. And it is a pretty good character moment. Like, he gets the Triforce, he kills the sage, he gets really mad, he's kind of feral looking. Love it.
Good pick.
I don't love, hijacking the plot, but whatever.
Yeah, he definitely is scary Ganondorf, no doubt.
Still a fun character moment. There's no getting around it. Look, so my pick for the week, I feel like the actual execution of this character doesn't really... it leaves a lot to be desired, but I'm going to give mine to Ashe, mostly just because I like the design of this character. I like the fiction of this character. In my headcanon, she was actually trained in the military arts by her father in the ruins of Snowpeak before Yeto and Yetta took up residence there.
That would be fun.
Yeah, sure. That makes sense, right? Why not?
Sure, why not?
Also, she's a foot taller than Link, which respect.
Yeah.
So
we stand a tall queen.
Yeah, we do. So yeah, Ashe, maybe you don't completely deserve it, but you are pretty interesting. You made me ask questions,
There you go.
So yeah, Ashe gets it for me.
Good enough.
Alrighty, let's get into part 6, which is our final thoughts, in which we let Matt wrap up this section of the game in as succinct a way as he can think to do.
So we start off this section of game with one of the key pivotal story moments where we learn the face and name of our true adversary in Ganondorf and the extent of his powers. We then progress to the next phase of our quest, where we are tracking down the shards of the Mirror of Twilight, and we move back to Hyrule Castle Town, interact with some of our good characters, Telma and our Order of the White Lotus folks, and head north to the snowy mountain range of Hyrule to get a less than satisfactory set piece that kind of wish we had more of, into a fun mini game of snowboarding, to one of the all-time great 3D dungeons in Snowpeak Ruins, which culminates in a really fun boss fight that is mechanically incredibly interesting, and the story of the characters that inhabit this place is really moving and emotional. All in all, a great section of game as we move into the back quarter-ish? Back third of Twilight Princess. Looking forward to more.
Cool. Rapid fire question. Max, you had one or two of these. Now it's my turn. Rapid fire question for you and for Matt. Max, going to you first. Arbiter's Grounds or Snowpeak Ruins?
Snowpeak Ruins.
Snowpeak Ruins.
I'm going Arbiter's Grounds.
I think the boss fight in Arbiter's Grounds is better, but I think Snowpeak Ruins was through and through maintained its identity better and had a better suite of puzzles, and the item is better.
To me, Arbiter's Grounds extra length combined with just the spooky factor that was really well done puts it over the top for me. There's no denying that the ball and chain is better
than the spinner.
Yeah, the spinner kind of sucks, like in hindsight. But
man, I love the spooky factor of Arbiter's Grounds. I wish that it had maintained all the way through instead of Max mentioned this in the Discord, but the back half or the back third of Arbiter's Grounds kind of lost the spookiness and became kind of amusement park ridey, which I didn't really think about until you said it, Max, but like it really is true. If we had kept that super haunted, incredibly terrifying vibe all the way through, I think the vibe of Arbiter's Grounds would just put it above.
Yeah. If I'm in the same boat, if the last third of Arbiter's Ground had been the same kind of emotional tone as the first 2/3, it would have been an all-time amazing dungeon, maybe beating Snowpeak. Imagine if they had done a boss that had the same ominous, scary factor as the mini boss it had, instead of woo, we're on a roller coaster fighting a dragon, with just what they had, which was fun, but like incongruous with the earlier chunks of the dungeon.
Yeah, and it's funny because I think the first half of the Arbiter's Grounds boss fight had the spooky factor, and then became the amusement park ride in the second half, which was, like you said, really fun, but kind of tonally weird.
Yep. Nope. No doubt about it. Those are valid points. I stand by my ranking. But
stand by it, Lyndon.
I don't think that there was a clear winner here. So
no, I agree. I think it's
I don't have an issue being outvoted.
Yes, and both. Yes.
These are both very good dungeons. But that brings us to the end of the Sacred Realms rundown for this week. We will be back next week with another installment of the Sacred Realms rundown, which is going to be a lot of fun because we've escaped the shadow of Arbiter's Grounds and Snowpeak Ruins now, and we can just kind of see what left there is to enjoy here. And
if anything,
yeah, judge it on its own merits outside of the shadow of those two, like all-time great, like notably people talk about them all the time. Dungeons.
Sure.
So going to be fun. Max, we really appreciate you joining us. This has been a super fun episode. We actually covered a lot of foundational cores of the Twilight Princess experience in this one, which I'm very happy about because I think you were the right person to have those conversations with. And because I think they are going to come back and reflect on our overall ranking of the Twilight Princess experience at the end of the season, in some way, whether or not it sways the ranking one way or another, who's to say? But like, it's good to put a voice to these things. Max, we do this every time you're on. If people are, I have no idea who's listening to this show for the first time in this episode, but maybe they're out there. So for that one
somebody who's in a car with their friend who's an avid listener.
Exactly. For that one person, would you please remind everybody where they can follow the excellent work that you're doing at Hyrule Interviews, which is truly just like invaluable. And I don't think anybody else in the Zelda community is tackling archiving of important quotes in that same way.
Yeah, so I run a website called HyruleInterviews.com, and it's a database of interviews with anyone who's ever worked on a Zelda game. I have like 1,000, 1,200, something like that, interviews in the database right now. And they're all marked up with metadata, like the date, who was in the interview, what games they talk about, and you can kind of click on the game and see all the interviews related to that game. It's a big relational database. So I do that mostly for fun. And I also, as I'm doing all that, I save quotes that I find interesting from these interviews, and I pick my favorites every day and post daily quotes on social media. So I have an account under Hyrule Interviews on Twitter, Blue Sky, Instagram, and Facebook. So you can find me at any of those. Yeah.
What you just started doing. Yeah, what you just started doing for fun, I think, has fallen into being actually the most comprehensive source of developer insights for the Zelda series on the internet. So, congrats.
Thank you.
Yeah, like, I mean, like that's actually a pretty monumental and very important feeling undertaking.
Yeah. I'm quite proud of it for those reasons, because I do kind of agree, just in terms of what it is, which is this very focused thing. It is amazing at it.
Yeah, it's excellent work, and we highly encourage all of you to go follow that account, because for every quote that Max drops on this show, there's 10 more on that channel that are equally as enlightening. And if you've been following the series for a long time, there's a lot of fun context there. And it's context that, especially if you're listening from if you're a North American listener, if you're outside of Japan, it's context that we don't often get, just because the burden of translation is sometimes pretty great. So yeah, definitely recommend checking it out for that reason, if for nothing else. But Max, we appreciate the work that you're doing, and as always, we're very grateful to you for continuing to come on this show as often as you do, because it gives us a level of legitimacy, which is fun. Yay, being legitimate. Oh man,
you were legit even without me, Lyndon.
Aww.
We appreciate that. But
the real ones.
Yeah. Anyway, it's been a great conversation, and we will catch up before too long, as we always do. Matt,
Lyndon,
it's 12:15.
I think this is one of the latest we've ever wrapped up for some reason.
on the Discord, they're going to be, someone's going to go in with a timestamp of us saying, this might be a shorter episode, 3-hour episode.
Look, we just have to stop saying it, and maybe it'll happen one of these
I don't
days.
know why we even commit to that anymore.
We shouldn't.
It's 12:15. The Rangers are World Series champions.
Yeet!
Hello. I don't even care that much, but I got into it on like a bandwagon.
Yeah, I mean,
standpoint.
it was a good bandwagon to be on.
Sure. Yeah.
It took you to the victory parade. Congratulations.
I'll take it.
Welcome.
It's been a fun one, Matt. I think it's time to get out of here for the week. Yeah, we're going to do this all again next week. We have 2 episodes to record in the coming 7 days. So that's going to be fun. It's going to be a good time.
Yeah, it's going to be fun.
Yeah. But in the meantime, yeah. I can't believe we're getting so close to the end of this game.
Yeah,
Like,
I mean,
it's
we're more than halfway now.
wild. I was talking to Mike, the detective, about this the other day. We were having a stogie and a whiskey, and I was mentioning to him how I think that the rank and recap for this one
This is going to be very interesting.
actually has the potential to get a little squirrely. Like,
I agree completely.
I think the mid pack might get really shaken up.
Yeah.
We'll see. That's going to be fun. But in the meantime, if you enjoyed today's show and you would like a little extra Sacred Realms in your life, you can head over to patreon.com/Sacred Realms Pod and become a patron. If you've got no rupees, not a problem. 5-star Apple Podcast reviews are a great free way to support us. More reviews means that more people see our show. That makes us very happy. Hylians. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Sacred Realms Pod for updates on the podcast and for behind the scenes action. Sacred Realms will be back next Wednesday, I think. Man, if we have to delay this to Thursday again, I'm going to feel real bad.
No, we can't keep doing that.
I know. It's
Next Wednesday.
bad habit to get into. We had very good reasons, but like,
Yeah, we need to stop doing this.
Yeah.
Yes.
exactly. Sacred Realms will be back next Wednesday, I promise, with our thoughts on Twilight Princess Chapter 8. We'd love for you to play along with us and to share your thoughts on our social channels. Twilight Princess can be played on the Nintendo GameCube and the Nintendo Wii in its original form. Its HD remaster can be played on the Nintendo Wii U, and any of those versions can be played on a variety of emulators, but please don't do that unless you legally own the version of the game that you're emulating. But in the meantime, may your hearts be full, may your arrows never miss. We'll catch y'all next time. Sacred Realms is an independent, listener-supported podcast, which is produced, edited, and mixed by me, Lyndon Willoughby. Business operations are handled by Matt Willoughby. Our music is generously provided by Darknuck and is available to listen to on Spotify. Finally, we'd like to thank Nintendo for continuing to create such exceptional and innovative experiences.